Board to order. Thank you all for being here. We appreciate you being involved. We'll begin our first order of business tonight. I'm sorry, I just lost my document. First order of business tonight is the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, thank you. Next item of business is the approval of the agenda. Are there any questions about the agenda as it's written tonight, or any modifications?
I'll move that we approve the agenda as presented.
Thank you.
I second it.
It's been moved and seconded that we approve the agenda as presented. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? And that motion passes. Next item of business is the approval of the minutes. Are there any questions about the minutes from the previous meeting of July 18th, 2023? Any changes to the minutes? Okay. Can we get a motion to approve the minutes from the regular study and voting session meeting of July 18th, 2023 as presented?
So moved.
Thank you.
Am I on?
You're on. Yes. I'll second that. So it's been moved and seconded that we approve the minutes from the regular study and voting session meeting of July 18th, 2023. All those in favor say aye.
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 All opposed?
I'm going to abstain since I missed it.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. So that motion passes 4-0 with one abstention. All right, we have a couple of presentations tonight. First is our School Safety Volunteer Pilot Program report with Ms. Townsend and Mr. Stickle. You guys can take the podium, please.
Good evening. I'm Misty Townsend. I have a couple roles, but my role tonight is as the Emergency Response Coordinator for the district. And I've been working with Mr. Andrew Stickle for pretty much this whole past school year as we began piloting a volunteer security program that we've kind of been incorporating into the high school. So I want to turn some time over to Andy to let him kind of give you a background as how it kind of came about, how it started, and then I'll wrap up and kind of say how it's been working as far as how we've partnered with the high school and what our goals are moving forward. So.
Yeah. Ladies and gentlemen of the board, thank you for your service and time. I appreciate the opportunity to present this community initiative, Prescott Protect. This is a group with many voices, so I'll do my best to voice the spirit and the driving force behind this initiative. We began with a question. Unfortunately, we have experienced an increasing number of various incidents in schools nationwide, some with catastrophic consequences. I believe our particular impetus was the tragedy that unfolded in Uvalde last spring. And each time there is a national tragedy of this type, there are questions and debates that exist about addressing issues at a macro level. And the question posed by our particular group of community men was, what can we do here in Prescott? And not get caught up in the expanse of the discussion at large. What can we as a community do? What can we as a small group of community men do to help aid and ensure that our students, teachers, and school staff are able to operate in a safe and secure environment? It's important to highlight here that we as a group understand that school safety is a top priority of our district and our staff. And I, as a father of kids in the district and a husband of a wife who works in the district, are very thankful for that. But the question, the driving question was, what else can we do? So it's important to highlight that. We recognize that we have a unique situation here in Prescott. We have a high population of ex-military and law enforcement residents, and we explored the possibility of incorporating this wealth of knowledge and experience into a school and community collaboration. We reached out to Superintendent, or former Superintendent Howard, who was immediately supportive of the idea of engaging the community and the schools together in this fashion. So an ad hoc committee of men was formed, and we've had extensive meetings along the way that led up to the opportunity to pilot a program at the high school with Mr. Neely, Ms. Townsend, and Mr. Dean, the leadership at the high school, also the existing security staff there. How could we best utilize a volunteer force or a volunteer group as additional human resources to aid in that goal of maintaining security and safety in the school setting. We were able to have 5 gentlemen, myself included, Mr. Shane Eitner, community member, Lance Detman, Grant Casada, and Mr. Ty Friedman were able to participate in this pilot program, and we volunteered various times throughout the week, working alongside the existing school security team there, and kind of fleshed out an idea of how we could utilize additional human resources in the high school, with the goal of launching that into the other schools in the district, particularly the schools that do not have any current security services at their disposal. So that was an important piece of that. I wanted to keep this brief so that I could offer an opportunity for questions. Missy, did you have anything to add to that as far as how it went from the perspective of the school?
Yeah, so we're pretty unique at the high school in that we already have several security officers that are full-time at the high school, as well as the school resource officer. But we wanted to pilot it there because we had the largest number of students, and we have the resources with administrators and security to kind of flesh this all out as a pilot. So what we ended up doing was we really utilized these gentlemen that came in and volunteered their time to help us on kind of a large scale around the perimeter of the school, because at the high school we are single point entry. We have a wealth of cameras at our disposal, as well as several security officers. So we didn't necessarily need additional stuff in the building, but we needed eyes around the campus because it's such a large space. And they did an amazing job coming in, working with our already existing admin team and security guards to kind of, what's their role, what's our role, how does this all work? And it went surprisingly well. I think we worked out some kinks. We've been continuing to meet. But what I've seen as the district kind of emergency response coordinator is the benefit that this can add to our other schools that don't have the same security resources that the high school does. And it's exciting because all of these gentlemen that we have worked with this school year and that have come forward and put forth hours of time, both in our meetings and in volunteering at the high school, is their willingness to just be whatever we need them to be. And it's really cool because they give a great perspective with their backgrounds. I mean, we've got, like Andrew mentioned, the incredible military veteran experience, the law enforcement experience. Their knowledge has been tremendous in helping me, both as a district level, kind of helping with school security and safety, but also at our site, giving us ideas, giving us different viewpoints that maybe they don't have because they're not necessarily educators. So it's been great kind of mingling together and kind of trying to work all this together. But our goal is to hopefully present this to administrators here the first part of the school year, kind of offer this up as an option for them as they kind of are moving into the start of the school year, and then begin this volunteer program through these other sites, especially the elementary schools that don't have the same level of security that we're blessed to have. So I know that's kind of a quick nutshell, but we wanted to, and I hope there's several of the, did you introduce all the ones that are here tonight real quick?
Yeah, Mr. Shane Eitner, Mr. Ty Friedman, and Mr. Sean Marin have all been involved from the beginning of this. Hands went up right away. So it was really, really great to see, and I'm grateful to these men here, in addition to others that couldn't be here for various reasons, but they've been all part of the whole thing, every step.
So, yeah. There, any questions about that we can help?
Okay, yeah, please, questions.
I'm thrilled to hear this because I brought it up to Joe Howard when I first came on as a school board member. And I think that was in February. I think that's when I met you at the high
Yes.
school. How many volunteers do we have now, and do they rotate schools so they know each campus?
So currently, we haven't had them rotate to the other sites yet because we wanted to make sure that we kind of worked out any kinks that we felt. We needed to really have clear, established objectives for the volunteers, what they could and couldn't do, what those interactions should and shouldn't look like with students. They are all cleared with the district, but just making sure that we kind of worked through some of that, and then making sure that we have enough volunteers, which I'll let Andrew speak on that because they've gone and done even more. And we have a lot of the volunteers that originally were interested are specifically interested, especially in the schools that their kids are at, wanting to become involved with those. So while they may not have spent time at the high school like these gentlemen have, they were like, we do want to be involved. We really want to be involved with the sites where our kids are at, just make sure that we're giving back to the schools that we're involved with. So.
Sure. I do have a number of questions.
Yeah, and it's okay. We have been doing this for about a year. So we first met at the beginning of the school year last year. We kind of spent first semester, like I said, meeting, talking about what they were looking for, what we were looking for, how it blended together, and then we started implementing it the second half of the school year last year.
And are our volunteers armed?
They are not.
No.
We only have a school resource officer at the high school and the middle school that are armed.
Okay. Then what exactly are they looking for? Somebody that they could call 911 for, or what?
So at the high school, they when they come in, they're wearing their identification that they are volunteers, safety volunteers. They also all are checked out radio at the high school. I would assume it would be very similar to that at whatever site they go to. They're keeping an eye out. We talk about what they're looking for. We talk about if there's things that they should be, if there's students, where those areas are, making sure that the perimeters, gates, places are secured, buildings are secure. They were doing a lot of that kind of movement. But it was primarily communicating right back to administrators and security on campus so that we could then implement, if needed, our emergency action plans.
Okay. Can I ask?
Oh, sure.
I'm sorry.
No, go right ahead.
Okay. So this began about a year ago, or you just started the planning of it, or it's starting it tomorrow, or?
Yeah, I know, good question. So we actually started the planning process, the meeting process at the beginning of last school year. The actual pilot implementation with boots on the ground started the second half of last school year. So I want to say we had, was it after fall break or after spring break?
Yeah,
After spring break, they began where they were there every week. At least several of them were there a couple times a week.
That sounds really good, and
Yeah.
I am so glad.
Well,
Because I've been hearing things like boys are going into the boys' bathroom and they're going in the stalls together and showing each other their things. And I mean, that's not very...
Not very accurate, is what it's
Yeah.
not.
So it's like, you don't want to have to be bathroom controlled, but these are inappropriate behaviors. But I worry about Uvalde, and that's the reason I went back for my master's, is the Columbine shootings. And you can't wait for a response from an armed officer. You have to be able to respond. And if it is at the parents', you know, if they are assigned at that school, how trained are they that they can be objective and do their job without trying to be the parent? And that's why I don't believe in teachers being armed at school, is because they have a whole class to take care of. And they can't say, okay, I'm going to go after this guy that's shooting up the other room.
Right.
Being retired law enforcement myself, I think of these as, disaster preparedness. So who's dealing with those things? A lot of questions there.
Yeah, no. So myself and Matt Dean, who is one of our assistant principals, and he is over security at the high school, whereas I'm kind of the big picture for the district as far as kind of like emergency action plan. So I'm involved with it, but at the high school level, Matt was key in kind of meeting with them ahead of time, talking about kind of training them, as you mentioned, making sure that they met with our existing security guards. They did go through a whole quite extensive meeting about, I could have brought the PowerPoint, but I didn't want to overwhelm everyone, about all the things that they were going to do and what they weren't kind of do. And what's great is that all of the gentlemen that have been part of this, and there's probably close to 10 that are part of this original group, when they came in, they were immediately, we are here for you guys. We're here to do whatever you need. There was no like agenda from any of them about, this is a, we're going to take over and this is what it's going to be like. They were never that way. They were so great and so respectful and so experienced that they were like, look, we're not educators. We come from so many different backgrounds, security specialists, this and that, but we're just here to be extra eyes for you. We're here to be what you need us to be. And that's really what I think the whole goal is. And to support that, I think it will be very easily implemented into these different schools within the district. And I think hopefully it will continue to grow now that they've made a campaign move to kind of bring in more people. And I think once it kind of gets out and as some of these other people see that this is open to all of our community members, if they're trained and willing to go through the volunteer process and do everything, that this is something that could really benefit our schools.
Speak to staff
Yeah.
really fast. So the number is 101, okay? 7 schools in the district. There are 3 shifts. If we do a morning shift, a noon shift, and an afternoon shift to cover the kind of the high traffic areas, that's 15 shifts times 7 schools, 101. So 101 men said, hey, we will take 1 2 to 3 hour shift per week. That's what we're looking for, okay? So we have, through Mr. Grant Casado, who's been an integral part of this whole discussion from the very beginning, and strong heart for the community and all things positive for the community, ran through his company, his business founding fathers, trying to, that was our initial campaign, and we had hands go up right away. So I think that I'm saying that to the board here, spread the word. That's what we want to have 100 staff, 100 volunteers, and the individual burden will be light, but the aggregate support will be very huge with that number, I think, because if it's just one person there, basically all day, I think that could be, it's more than we have now, so.
Thanks, Sandy. I'd like to be a liaison with that if you guys are interested. I have quite a few friends who are retired law enforcement who are able to carry guns.
We're here to, as Missy said, again, I'm one voice in this group. Somehow I drew the short straw of presenting in front of the board, but the whole heart of it is we don't want to be on the sidelines if there is something that happens in our town, in our community. We want to be there. So that's.
And Stan and I have discussed it too in the past. He has so many retired vets that would be interested. We can keep replenishing your volunteers as needed. So I'm volunteering you, but I'd be glad to spearhead that.
And I can provide that information to the district leadership so they can pass that on to you guys.
Great.
For the contacts.
Awesome. Thank you.
Okay. I was just going to ask for contact. Who do we send these people too? And you'll let us know?
Yes, we
You'll
will
let
let
us
you
know.
know.
To be determined.
No, you actually answered my question. I was curious as to the number of volunteers we would have to keep on board to implement this, and you answered it already, so.
But it's self-sustaining, you know, it's not gonna be as my kids graduate, the long-term play is that it's just something that can just continue on its own. And it'll be recognizable as a group, and then well beyond when I'm gone, well beyond when Missy's gone, whatever, I mean, it's gonna be something that other men can fill in, so
Perpetuate,
that's the
yeah.
idea.
Great.
Right now, we have the original dozen members, and then we've now increased it to probably 15 to 20, just with an initial, that was only a week ago. So we haven't really launched full-throated campaign of recruitment yet, because we wanted to discuss it with y'all first, and then also figure out how we were gonna.
With the site principals.
Yeah, lay it out to individuals.
Yeah, I kind of want to wrap this up, but I really do want to first commend Andy on your initiative of this. So full disclosure, we've had, Andy and I have been speaking since the very beginning of this. And Sergeant Scott last meeting stated, you know, it's not just about quantity, it's the quality of people that are in programs like this. So you don't want to bring everybody in, because I know these guys, every single one of these guys personally, and they are very experienced, and there's no doubt that they've come into the school and they had zero agenda but to support. And let's be clear, they are a supporting element to the school district, to every school. They are the eyes and ears, they're extra eyes and ears. But more importantly, as I stated last meeting, in reference to like the IED fight, you want to do as much as you can left of boom to deter anything in these schools. And this is an added deterrent. Andy and I were speaking months ago, and we looked back at one of the school shootings, and one of the shooters researched their site and found that they didn't go to one site because there were programs like this. Mm-hmm. More resistance is better.
Yes.
We want the word out there that this program is involved. The resource officers are involved. We have school security. This is all important. So as much word as we can get out there through the newspapers, through this board meeting, through the agendas, is very important to what we're trying to achieve here.
And I just have one question really, and then just a comment. I've heard of these programs in other schools, you know, Stan mentioned that. Are you basing your program on any of those other existing programs that are already out there?
We did, in the early phases, research some programs such as Watchdogs, this one, Dads of Great Students. It was important to us to keep it, while we maybe used tenets of those, it was important to us to keep it a very grassroots, local effort so that we could just do what we needed to serve the schools based on feedback from leadership in our community. Again, going back to my initial comment, what can we do here, not taking into account too much of the national dialogue, just keep it local, was our intent.
Okay.
And as you can imagine, each site is very different.
Yeah.
And each administrator at those sites know specifically what their areas are. And so we wanted it, when we met, to fit that model. We didn't want them to come in with these expectations that didn't match what we needed and what supported what our schools needed. So I appreciate that they researched it, but that they came in willing to go, okay, how can this fit PUSD in each of the different sites?
Right. And so hopefully for the future, as we get these, we've got now an SRO at Mile High, we're going to have hopefully some school security officers that are certified peacekeeping, or is that the right term?
Law enforcement.
Law enforcement officers that can bring a gun to campus, but they'll be doing that in their off hours. So hopefully you guys can work closely with them and start building this program and the connection with our local police department. And the other thing I want to say is just thank you for volunteering your time to do this. This is really important, and we're really appreciative. Like I said, I've heard of these programs in the past, and I've wanted something like this in Prescott for a long time, and You know, I volunteer separately outside of what you do, and I think just having adults on campus gives those students the feeling that, I don't know if it's a feeling of security, if it's a feeling of just that there is somebody there if they need to turn to you, you're there. And that's so important. So thank you for what you're doing.
Missy, could I recommend a program for both of you, Andy, to check out? It's called FASTER, F-A-S-T-E-R, Saves Lives. And it's a little 3-minute intro video on their website. They come out and train people. And it's what you do in the meantime while you're waiting for the police department or SWAT, if you know anything about situations like that. You have to hold the perimeter until SWAT is in place, and then they go in. So this teaches, in the meantime, what to do at the school site, how to do if there is a shooter, an active shooter. It teaches everything from how to care for sucking chest wounds, you know, combat training kind of thing.
Yes, absolutely.
FASTER saves lives.
And I know this is, our presentation time is way over the limit, but I can assure you that, and I'm happy to talk with you at another time. As a district position, we are doing that. Our administrators have been trained in everything you just talked about, as well as each of our sites. The only site, I'm finishing Lincoln this year and our Transportation Facilities Center, but every site has been trained exactly in what you're talking about. Our staff, our administrators, our emergency action plan is right up to date. So I agree, our district is, we've really set the bar high because this is a priority for both all of you as well as all of our administrators.
Absolutely.
So thank you.
Great job, Missy.
Thank you.
Can I just add that I think a beautiful part of this that maybe we haven't thought about is it's so nice to see community members step up and say, how can we be a part of the solution? Many times it feels like the opposite. It's like your problem, you fix it, and you're saying this is a community problem, we're here to help. And our staff, I'm sure, feel very grateful that there's community support around safety. Because we think about the students, but think about those staff who feel responsible for those students. They have a lot of fear that something's going to happen, and I just really appreciate you stepping up and doing this. Thank you.
Yes.
Thanks, Ty.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Our next item is a presentation on achievement data. Ms. Steingraber and Ms. Reed.
All right, I guess I get to start. Ms. Reed gets to sit for a few minutes longer. So my name is Renee Steingraber, and I'm actually a retired educator from Ohio. After 31 years, I retired, and we were one of those retirees that came to the beautiful Prescott area and decided we'd go back to work for a little bit. My husband and I did. And I feel very blessed to have come to Prescott and been here almost 5.5 years already, and to be able to dig into data, which is truly a passion of mine. So I'd like to welcome the new board members that I haven't had a chance to actually formally meet, and also thank the community and family members for coming today, because it is a very important topic that we're going to discuss and share with you today in here. And that's, of course, the achievement assessments. The achievement assessments, some really important perspective to think about is at the end of today, if you learned everything on the agenda and we covered it, and tomorrow we gave you a quiz, we would hope you would know what was said, right? We have an expectation that you would have probably 80% or higher as a passing rate of mastery because you just learned that topic. The state assessments are slightly different in that when you think about putting it into perspective. At the end of the year, we are expecting our children, and I believe rightly so, to understand and be able to apply skills that they have learned for an entire year. It's almost like calling you back in May and saying, hey, what happened in August at that meeting? So I really want to put that into perspective of, we get so hooked on passing and failing, and again, we want all of our kids to be proficient, but also to understand these achievement tests are one point in time. And I'll explain a little bit more about that in a minute. The other thing is these achievement assessment results, they guide our A to F grade, which is huge in public opinion and also to understand how our schools are doing in here. The K to 8 buildings, 30% of the A to F grade is on proficiency. An additional 50% is on growth. I'm not going to talk a lot about growth today, but growth is so important, and especially after that ugly, like 2020 time, I don't want to mention again. But we know nationally, especially in math, our kids really dropped. And if a fifth grader comes in at a first grade level, you're not going to bring them up to fifth grade, no matter how good you are, no matter how dynamic you are. The ability to bring that proficient level up 4 and 5 grade levels doesn't happen, which is why I am happy that the state considers growth when they are doing this A to F. At the high school level, 30% is proficiency. No growth is shown in the A to F. And then Genesis is now our alternative school, which 15% is measured with the proficiency based on these tests that I'm going to share the data from today. So moving on, this is preliminary data. And what that simply means, the state has not publicly released this data. The State Accountability Department takes all the data from the tests and they vet the data. They pull out students who are FAE and non-FAE. FAE stands for full academic year. So those are students who are enrolled the first 10 days of school, and then the first week of May, they're also in our school. The non-FAE, they pull those students out of the data. And a simple example, we might have a student enroll in March 1st. We test April 1st, we have to test that student. So when we look at the platform data, which is what I'm going to show you, that student data is there. But the reality is, should we be held accountable for a student we've had for a couple weeks of school? We still have to test them, but that's the difference between FAE and non-FAE students in the data. The current data that I'm going to show you, it was retrieved, we have ACT, and that is it is retrieved directly from an ACT site. It's not the Arizona State site, but the ACT site. And Pearson is the vendor that has all of our other tests, and it's called Pearson Access Next. So I'm able to go in there, and again, this is not public data, but I can go in and pull some summary data out of those locations. The ADE process for the final data, in mid-June, they send us a file it comes to me, I share with the principals, and it's student level data. So it's specific data that the principals are supposed to check to make sure those are the correct students, or if a data is not showing. They call them static files. Then they're re-released mid-August. We haven't received those yet. We check them over again. And then, according to the state, they have by November 1st to release the data to the public. Reality, we learned last year when they didn't notify us, but they usually release it in September. So we're kind of on the lookout now, September. And this is data that all of you can go to the state website. You can go to accountability and download the data yourself. So all the data that I'm sharing with you today, I have not done any figuring, no mathematical figuring on it. I've simply taken from the sites that it shows us, and that's what I'm presenting to you today. The reality is the numbers might change by the time the public release comes out because of the FAE and non-FAE effect on the data.
And errors, they're still cleaning up.
And errors. About a couple weeks ago, I forwarded to Marty an email that I received that there were still errors in some of the data. So that happens often.
On the state level, not on the district level,
Correct. Thank you for clarifying that. Okay, so yeah, it is the state level. But that's why it's important to say today it's preliminary data that we are looking at in here. So the Arizona Achievement Assessments, I want to share with you what the state requires us to administer in Prescott Unified School District and all schools in Arizona. The first one being the AASA, and that is for grades 3 through 8. The components are ELA and math. ACT Aspire is grade 9. And those components are English, reading, science, and math. ACT is grade 11. This is the same ACT that is given nationally as well. They didn't make one specific for Arizona. And that is, we receive in the scoring for ACT a composite score, math, science, STEM, English, reading, writing, and ELA. I'm going to share those scores, but I put in red ELA and math because the state of Arizona is only concerned about those two scores when they do the A to F. Clark?
Can I ask a clarification question?
Sure.
And point something out? For those of us who aren't familiar, remind us what ELA stands for.
English Language Arts.
Okay, good. So that's important that we're talking about English there. And then the other piece is this. With the ASA tests, well, the ASA test is most of the tests that goes on. Are those equivalent to tests that are given, say, in Ohio or Missouri or California or any other state?
They have their own sort of proficiency test.
Okay.
However, the AASA is aligned to Arizona standards only.
Gotcha. So is there any way for me to compare data? The ACT is different. You've mentioned, I got that
Correct.
nationwide. So I can compare Arizona data to California data to Connecticut data to nationwide data. It's a little different. I'm sure you're going to get to that.
It's a little different because it is a proficiency, and
Right.
they all have their own proficiency and
But the
their cut
groups of
scores for
kiddos who take them are
proficiency.
different in each place, but it's the same test from
Correct.
state to state. Because it's not the same test from state to state, is there any way for me as a person to say, aha, Ohio is doing much better than Arizona, or Arizona is doing much better than Ohio?
Quite honestly, I would not make that. I would not make that connection personally. You know, we can talk about it, but we don't know the details of, we
Sure.
can pull the blueprints for the AASA, and we can see what measurement is on, you know, fractions or numeral, the different things. You can find out the percentage.
Right.
So in order to do a comparison state to state, I almost say you would have to go to that state and see if their blueprints for their state test aligns with the Arizona
Sure.
blueprint.
And so what I'm hearing you say is achievement data in Ohio and Arizona cannot be compared to each other, grades 3 through 8,
I would not
in any
recommend a
reasonable way.
comparison in
I
that
gotcha.
way. You know, there's always general,
Okay.
but I would not because their standards are different.
That's important
So-
information. Sometimes we hear people in the community suggest otherwise. They say, hey,
Mm-hmm.
I know Arizona's at the bottom. It is true that Arizona's at the bottom in
Right.
terms of per student funding, so you could make a reasonable assumption based on that Arizona achievement may not be the highest in the United
Correct.
States. But there is really no way for us to compare that from state to state, other than tests like the ACT on the high school level, and then the NAEP test, which is given
Which is-
from state to state periodically in different schools. For instance,
Correct.
we usually about every other year have one school in our district selected as a sample for that data. So that data can be compared from state to state.
Correct.
But we have people
The
who
NAEP
oftentimes
data are
tell us, we know Arizona's at the bottom and, or I heard Arizona's in the middle and, there's really no, anybody who thinks that is not correct, I guess.
It would
is-
not be my recommendation to do
okay.
that. And here's one example why I can only speak from my experience. Coming from Ohio, and I did data in Ohio, when our proficiency test came out, the cut scores changed every year based on the cohort who took that test, right? In Arizona, it hasn't changed since, I believe, 2015 or 2016. The cut scores pre-COVID, post-COVID, throughout has remained the same. So, you know, to me, that's a major difference when you're looking at
Sure.
the passage percentages. So thank you for sharing that point in
Yeah,
there.
appreciate the clarification.
Sure. Okay, so to move on with that, the AZ side. One of the things you'll notice in the ACT right here is science. The state does not use that data when they share it with for the A to F grade. They use the science data from the AZ side. And so that science data, the science is given in grades 5, 8, and 11. So this is all the data I'm going to share with you. And if any of you have questions or need clarifications, just as Clark needed a clarification and a little discussion there, please, I have no problem being interrupted, and I'm more than happy to share what you need. So the ELA assessments and the math assessments, I think there's some confusion in that. When I actually started here, the short 5.5 years ago, they were called the AZ Merit. So the test came out as the AZ Merit from 2015 to 2019. In 2020, they actually changed to the AZM2. Then the name changed again to what we currently have, which is the AASA. So the name changed. However, the only change that was real in the test was the grade levels that were tested. So 2015 to 2019, grades 3 through 11, all students took the AZ Merit. In the 2020, when it started, actually, we didn't test in 2020, but that's when it was coming about, it became 3 through 8, but they also tested grade 10. So they dropped 9 and 11. And then the current is grades 3 through 8 because they brought in the ACT Aspire and they brought in the ACT at the high school level. So the test really remained the same. There's still the same cutoffs for minimally proficient, partially proficient. Those two are considered not passing areas. Passing, or the proficient and the highly proficient are considered passing the state test levels. They're benchmark levels. The item bank where the questions came from remained the same. And the testing platform did change from Tide, which was, I think, Air was the vendor, and Pearson became Pan. So now all of the tests are actually on Pan. A new writing bank was created from Arizona student samples, and that came about because of Tide, and what I was told from the state is the state did not own the writing samples, and the writing samples were also not from Arizona students, they were from all different states. So our state chose to, we did it was called a field test writing, I think it was last year, where students had to do writing samples. Then the state now uses that bank of writing samples to grade our AASA tests. Okay? Any questions on that?
Yeah. Ma'am? So Pearson is now Pan? Is that correct?
So Pearson is the vendor that owns the testing platform we call PAN. It's Pearson Access Next, so it's just short for that. So Pearson is the vendor, and the testing platform is called PAN, referred to as PAN.
And Pearson supplies the testing for most states in the United States. And they gear that off of what states have said their state standards are, and that's what the publishers use. So that's why the publishers are changing their curriculum constantly, is so that it's up with and teaching things that the kids are actually testing in. So the public needs to know that Pearson is that, what do you call it, that company
It's
that
the large
creates
vendor.
all these tests. So
That
they're not
creates
going
many.
to deviate too much.
As in, just to clarify, when you say they're not going to deviate too much from, are you talking from their text
From
to the
state to
test or from state to
yeah.
state?
You have
Yes.
the same kinds of questions,
You know-
and then they'll shuffle them up in order to keep the
To do that.
test fresh.
I think you've
But-
hit on a really good point.
Thank
And
you.
that point is the questions and the way they're worded. What we tend to do, especially if you've taught me 30 years ago, it was more rote memory. What can you put back? What can you get back, right? Where now, especially in science, there is a question that is asked with a graph, and the students have 5 questions that go with that paragraph, that reading component, and the graph. And this is my opinion, but I believe like vendors have pushed that, and the state test. When you mentioned that, the one thing I would differ is that the state of Ohio questions would be different in content than Arizona because they're going by Ohio standards.
Regional kind of differences.
Does that
too,
sound like the
yes.
same page of
We're on the same
interpretation?
page.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that.
And Renee, to clarify, would Ohio likely have the same cut scores that Arizona has chosen? Let's say.
No. As
Okay.
I mentioned, now I've been gone for a while, but when I was in Arizona, the cut scores were changed every year based on the cohort of students who tested.
And sorry,
Whereas-
I should have defined, or maybe have you define what cut score means. Help us out with that.
So the cut score, when I mentioned the minimally proficient and the partially proficient and proficient, those are where the cut scores are laid in there.
Can
Okay.
you,
Sure.
so proficiency versus passing.
Correct.
So that's where the cut scores come into play. Is there a way you can identify for us what those numbers are based on proficiency, high proficiency, partial proficiency? Because I can look at it and say, I could pass my geometry class. But am I proficient in geometry? No. I might pass it with a C, but that's enough for me to get out of school. That's enough for me to graduate with a diploma.
Right.
But am I proficient in geometry? So I have a hard time with proficiency and highly proficient being the only passing marks, when partially proficient students still may pass and do just fine out in the world. So what are those numbers?
So the numbers, I don't have the numbers in the presentation, but I
Okay.
do have those available that they will show what the cut scores
Okay.
are.
Okay.
I'd like to say you bring up a great point that I wasn't going to address in this information, but this is like overall information that we're sharing, right? Summary information. Exactly what you're talking about is the data that teachers use and need. Because just because a student is partially proficient, they might be 5 points away from being proficient.
Right.
So a teacher can use that data along with some more detailed data to say, wow, they're this close, we need to provide intervention here because we don't need them to drop lower, but we need to move them into the proficiency range. So the exact scores, like I said, I don't have them here, and they might be from 1 to 1,400, and it's in there. But that is very important data as a district that we do look at.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
I have a slide that might help out
Okay.
a little bit more coming up in here, I think. All right. So here we go. So right in here, I mentioned the ELA, the math, the percent passing, and the proficiency levels that are available. So spring of 2023, again, I pulled this right off from the platform, so it includes students who are non-FAE members in here. Here are our passing percentages for the ELA test in grades 3 through 8 and the math test in grades 3 through 8 as well. This is the percent passing for PUSD, which includes all students in here, FAE and non-FAE. This data is one thing to look at, and of course, if you don't have a comparison, it's kind of hard to put into perspective. So I have added in here the state results as well, so that we can see a comparison of how we are doing as a district to the state. When they release the public file, we can look how we compare to other school districts, but at this time we cannot. We don't have that data available to us.
And Renee, you mentioned this earlier, but it's very important for each of us to understand. Passing is, as Mr. Freyer suggested, this doesn't mean like a kid who passed a class versus a kid who failed a class. Passing, the way that the state uses it, is students who fell in the highly proficient category or the proficient category.
Correct.
Anybody in the partially proficient category or the minimally proficient category, regardless of where they are at, don't show up in these numbers right here.
They are
Okay.
considered not passing by state standards in here.
So passing the way that I think of passing traditionally, could be applied to this, but the way that I think of failing traditionally probably could not be applied to the other group of students who are not in this passing group.
Correct. I think it goes to the point of, we take a test tomorrow and see how many of you remember what happened today. We would expect that level to be high. Toward the end, it's retaining that knowledge for a year, items that were taught at the beginning of the year and retaining that knowledge to the end. We expect that. We desire that. We want our kids to be there. But we also I need to say, the likelihood of a student getting all of our students getting 90% on a state test, in my opinion, is unrealistic at that point. We want them to pass, don't get me wrong. We don't want them in the minimally proficient and partially proficient. But we also have to be realistic of what's being asked, what's being measured, and how it's being measured.
So if I'm used to thinking of 60% is a D and 70% is a C and 80% is a B and 90% is an A, that frame of reference simply
Does not
doesn't
apply
apply
to
here.
this.
Gotcha, thank you.
No, that does not apply to this. When you do look at this data, and I know it's hard to see from out there, but there is some color coding on what you'll notice in the ELA, a lighter yellow, and the math up until grades 7 and 8. And that is just showing that we are higher than the state in our results. We do score higher than the state in the 2023 results, with the exception of math in grade 7 and grade 8. Okay. Any questions from the board?
This kind of reminds me of, when you're in a class and everyone gets these scores and the teacher comes up with a curve, right? Has there ever been any discussion about that? I mean, just so that, because I want to walk home with an A, right?
Right.
But the test that I was given is not I mean, nobody is even close to that as far as the percentage passing. I mean, has there been any discussion that you know of or something like that?
Nothing in my 5.5 years, and last year I can tell you, Kelsey and Secor and I had some direct talk with accountability because of some misinformation that came from them and trying to clarify.
Yeah.
And at this point, what I've been told is, well, we did this with teachers on the board, and this is how we do it, and this is how we're going to continue to do it.
But I think in a way, this is what that does. So a curve compares you to the rest of the class. So if the highest score was 70 out of 90, that 70 becomes 100%.
Right.
And so it's in comparison to everyone else. And so that's why we always like to look at where we are in comparison to everyone else, because this term of percent passing is very misleading. There's a cut score that the state creates around proficiency, but then they label it as passing, which is very misleading.
No, I agree, and I just think that we do this, but gets published is just that raw
Yes,
score.
yeah.
And it's, I don't, yeah, I mean, I think that we should be, if we're gonna show the public how we are in the area, in the state, how we match up, it's important for us to put these numbers up. But then now you have to interpret it, so.
Right.
Correct.
So why don't we opt out?
We are not able to opt out, to the
Why?
best of my knowledge. The
No,
state
we are
requires
able
that we
to
are.
opt out.
Funding, we would lose a tremendous
the-
amount of funding if we choose to,
Excuse me?
we would lose a tremendous amount of state funding if we chose not to participate in the state testing.
Yeah, but
Well,
if it's not presenting, I'm sorry, Cara.
that's okay, go ahead.
If it's not representative of what you're saying our students are performing at, then that's creating quite a disconnect between the public and between what we are seeing. Let's get our own testing company in and do our own statistics. And I would have to double check, but I have been told we have that option as a school district to opt out of the state testing.
Brian,
So-
can you speak to that for us?
So I'll defer, I will defer that question. It is my understanding from everything I have seen with the laws that when it comes testing time, we'll get questions where we don't want to give the test to our child, we're not allowed to. There's actually a state,
Sure.
I have in my files, that the state does not allow you to take your child out and not test in a school district.
That's my understanding too, and in fact, there were
It's,
provisions where if a child can't take the test, we're supposed to go to the child. In which if they can't mobily get to school because of physical ailments, we're supposed to go to them in order to test.
And we have done that with approval from the state. We have some students who are unable to and worked with the parents to whatever, within the window of testing, whatever works best for a parent and a child, that we make that happen.
Isn't there also part of the A to F label that is based upon the percent tested as well? And
There is, absolutely. Thank
Yep.
you, Brian, for
Welcome.
bringing that up. We have to have 95% of our students tested. And so that does come into play as well. If we only have 90% tested in the A to F, then 5% of our students are counted as failing with the lowest score, so that drops our numbers down as well.
It's only private schools get to operate with state funding and no state accountability. Public schools don't get to do that.
Let's be trailblazers and let's find that answer out.
And find that. Thank you
We just
for
did
sharing
find the
that.
answer out, but we can,
Check and see if there's a little more to it.
yeah,
huh?
we can see how quickly things fall apart if we choose to not comply, I suppose.
I would just like to say that now that we know that the level of the testing has been the same pretty much through all the tests, I think this is a great way to see if our school is increasing in its academic achievement or decreasing in its academic achievement. And I think I looked at the 22, and I'm thinking these might be.
Here you
Oh,
go.
thank you.
Thank you, Cara, for leading right into
What
the
a great
next slide.
segue, that's
Yeah.
fantastic.
I
That-
appreciate that.
That we
Yes.
weren't doing too bad. I thought we were a little bit better than 22, but
Right.
except for in that math, that's like
That's the conundrum.
A dilemma,
Yeah.
Yes.
yeah, a dilemma
Yes.
there.
But,
Depends on the grade level you're looking at.
Right.
Yeah, but I do think that it's a good standard that we can just look at to see if we're doing better as a district
Thank
or
you.
worse as a district.
Well
Yes.
said,
So,
well said.
I like it.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And just for your knowledge, I do have it back to 2015, the data, this historical data that I share with the principals and the admin staff every year to kind of track and to be able to look over and see what's happening and see what's happening in life in here. So, for example, this slide shows last year and the previous 2 years as well with the data in here. Something I want to point out in here, which is awesome, is the math in 4th grade. So I know Shelley is going to speak next about interventions, but I wanted to share with you a little tidbit about 4th grade math, and that is Lincoln School. And Lincoln School this year really dug into some targeted intervention. They had rigorous curriculum in 4th grade. Their teachers were teaching those students, and they were doing interventions in the classroom and interventions outside of the classroom. And this year, Lincoln School grade 4 math had a 61% passage rate, compared to the previous year, 34.
Nice.
So those are little tidbits. As a district, we do dig in to show those a little bit more. I want to take it one step farther, though, because those are 2 different cohorts. The cohort that got the 61, they did in 3rd grade have a 57% passage rate. So they were smarter, should we say? Not really, but they were a smarter little group of kids. But really, for anyone who researches data and understands, like your high-level runner, to increase their score, if a high-level runner, an elite runner, left this building, ran around the courthouse square, and came back and did it again tomorrow, the score would probably increase about this much. If I did it, let me tell you, it would be this much. Okay? I'm not a runner. But it is hard to make our high achievers grow. But Lincoln School did it, and that's just one little example I wanted to share.
I think that also is an indicative of the kind of interventions that we're doing.
Yes.
And I think we always talk about interventions. We look at where our scores are low and we're not happy with the percentage, and we develop interventions. And I think what Lincoln did last year is a really excellent example of what can happen when you tackle a specific area, a genre of math. What was missing? We looked at where they were missing the questions, how we can intervene to make that happen, and it worked. So I think we owe a lot to the teachers who came up with those ideas for intervention.
And one of the first conversations we started to have, just super well said, that we had on the district level, as soon as we got some raw data back in hundreds of columns and hundreds of rows and whatnot, and started to see, holy smokes, what happened at Lincoln? There's a lady sitting right there. That's Karen Hughes, who's our former principal at Lincoln and is now at Granite Mountain.
Right.
And we started to talk with her about, what did you do different? Renee mentioned rigorous curriculum. We have that exact same curriculum at all 3 elementary schools. So what approach did you take with interventions that we can cross-pollinate to our other elementary schools to see that success in other places? Those are the kind of discussions we're constantly having. We hate having discussions. 40% doesn't mean what you think it does, folks. The kind of discussions that we love to have are, how can we get even better? How can we bring kids up? What do we do to improve?
Can I mention too, I think one thing that I notice is growth. While from 2022 to 23, it's more mixed, but in general, 2021 to 23, there is an uptick. So in general, it's not every single area or every single class.
Right.
So the growth that we see, I think, is important. It's not, I said this last time, but you're not going to turn a ship, on a dime. You can't turn a yacht on a dime. You have to build into that turn. So I'm hopeful with some of the interventions we have and the curriculum that we're putting in place that we're going to be making this growth continue so that you continue to see maybe not a linear upward trend, but at least an upward trend.
Correct, absolutely. You bring up a great point in there. And I think something that's worth mentioning, if you look at like the 5th grade at the 44 in there, and then you count backwards, they were 4, 3, 2. In those, I hate to use the word COVID, but in those years where we know there was learning loss, they were at a really important learning grade level of like first grade, second grade, kindergarten. And so those little ones came in a little further behind than some of our other students, but yet I have to shout out to the elementary school teachers because they are finding out what skills they're lacking, they're identifying, and through interventions, they are getting them up to speed. Brian, did you want to share something?
Yeah, and it's just kind of a piggyback and starting with what Cara said. You know, for me, a number like this that's all encompassing of all the students with grade level, kind of, it gives the direction of the arrow. The drilling down of the conversations at the classroom, even the teacher level and comparing data. This teacher is, you know, doing something that's reaching students, and how can we emulate that across the district? It's those individual student conversations. Because I got to tell you, there's times at Taylor Hicks where we had a group and we had students that were partially proficient, and we celebrated because there's other data, there's attendance data, there's socioeconomic data when it comes to just where they're coming from. There's data on those basic needs of food, shelter, clothing that the students are missing. It's the individual data, and sometimes we need to celebrate those that are reaching the highest.
We're growing in those scores. They're showing
and we have them
growth.
for 12 years.
Right.
Ultimately, graduation is the ultimate passing of the test.
Well, thank you for sharing. Moving on to the ACT Aspire, and this was brought in for grade 9, and it has English, reading, science, and math. Those are the components that we get from the ACT Aspire. So if I really read up on that A to F a lot because I think it's important because that's how the public sees us. That's how we look at ourselves. How are we doing? Business rules by the state usually come out after we get the grade, and then they're approved. And so we have to look them up. I have to say, the state's getting better. The first year I came, and Marty told me that, I was like, are you crazy? How do you know what you're going to be graded on, right? So the A to F, currently there are some business rules on there. It's a draft. I've been told by the state that in September when they have the meeting, the State Board of Education would vote on them. But I found it interesting to note that the ACT Aspire is not figured in the proficiency grade component of the 9 through 12 traditional buildings or the alternative buildings. The ACT Aspire gives us bonus points in there. So I just wanted to share that because I found that to be a bit interesting in here. So the ACT Aspire, as I said, here is the PUSD data based on what I can get from the site when I look at it. And here is a comparison to how the state achievement levels at the end of 2023.
And remind us, this is ninth graders?
This is ninth graders only, correct. They actually call it a cohort, so it's the students who are designed to be in ninth grade and will graduate at 2020, whatever it is, in there. So I think you'll notice again, we are above the state.
When they test in math, incidentally, so when they test, they're testing at a ninth grade level, which is typically what, algebra? Is that?
Many kids, yeah. Some
Yeah.
kids are beyond that. But
Yeah, and that's where, to my point, so if there are kids that are then going on to advanced algebra and trigonometry and geometry. I didn't do very well with that.
And algebra 2.
It was close.
So, but they've moved on, so they haven't done algebraic equations in that year, and so is there anything that accounts for that? You know, you haven't practiced it, just like you said, you know, learning in May and then in August is a little bit different.
That's a
But it
great point,
builds.
Stan. It's kind of like, go back to Renee's really interesting board meeting analogy. A lot of our ninth graders took algebra as eighth graders, and so then they get tested on algebra-specific skills as ninth graders, and it's, instead of asking them, what happened at last month's board meeting, it's like asking them, what happened at last year's board meeting? That's even harder for kids to remember. Doesn't mean that they weren't fully participating and proficient and doing well with the board meeting back when, but they've moved beyond those specific skills in some respects, right? They still have, obviously, that foundation, but as they get tested on algebra-specific skills, there can be some of that shows up in our.
Those are our high achievers, right?
Yeah,
So they're,
yeah.
and I mean, even statewide, you're seeing that is pretty low, but it's got to count for something.
Yeah, it does scaffold on itself. So, you know, what you learn at the beginning of ninth grade, you use it throughout that year learning those skills and adding on to it. So you're not actually going all the way back to August 3rd, you know, what you learned on August 3rd, because if you can't remember what you learned on August 3rd, then you should not be moving on to the next grade level in May, because it all builds.
Linda, you're exactly right. That is true
Absolutely.
for every one of the classes, and math is particularly that way. You're right.
Yes.
It's not
I-
all compartmentalized. It builds on itself,
Right.
just like you say.
I have to say, I agree totally with both of your points in here. And Linda, as you said, it continues, it builds, right? And the skills go on and build, and they do them. However, to Stan's point, when we were given the AZ merit in that before, we found at Mile High, the 8th graders, we had them taking, they took their advanced test and took the grade level test. Our higher level students did not do well on the grade level test. And we attributed that and found a pattern that they weren't practicing those skills. They were applying it in the upper levels, but because they were not practicing them regularly on the grade level test of our high achievers, they didn't do well. So I think it validates both of your points.
And I can just speak, I mean, to put it in mathematical terms, to do perimeter, you add up all the sides of a figure. Knowing how to do it and punching in a calculator doesn't mean that you could actually take those numbers, and if it's quadrilateral, add up all four manually. So it's the translation of the skills applying versus actually being able to individually do.
To do them, correct. Okay. The ACT Aspire, this is how the AASA is also broken down, where you have the minimally proficient, the partially proficient. However, it's interesting to me because the ACT Aspire, which is created by the ACT, they don't use the terms really failing and by our state standards, and the close and need of support, these are percentages of not passing. So Andy, when you had mentioned about, they use the term close because the kids are close to passing, many of them in those categories right in there. And you can see the comparison of where we are compared to the state. And I think a significant data point, if you look at in need of support, which is the lowest one, and how we compare to the state. In the area of English, almost a third of the state is at the lowest level in the ACT Aspire, where 18%. And again, not that we want to see 18% there. We want to see 0%. That's what we're striving for. But the reality is, in a comparison to the state, that's a significant data point.
Another takeaway for me from this data is that I look at science, for instance, and I see, wow, statewide scores are low in the exceeding area. Certainly that's the case with PUSD as well. It's one of the only data points where we're not above the state. That underscores for me the importance of what the board did in one of our most recent meetings, which was adopt new science curriculum that now matches the science standards that students are being tested on. Such an important thing that they did. Really appreciate that.
All right, good. So moving on from there, the ACT. So the ACT, when I go to the ACT website, I get scores to look at, which are the mean scores. Similar if your child took the ACT and maybe scored a 19 or an 18 or a 17. So those are the scores that I was able to pull. It's not percent passing or percent not passing. The state in their public files, when they release those, that's where we can find that information. Do I want to say thanks for coming? Just feel like I need to.
Bye-bye.
That's in there, bye-bye. Right, in there. So I want to separate out math and ELA because, again, the ACT, the state is only taking the data from the math and the ELA. That's all they use of this. Science is through the AZ side. So our spring administration and this is PUSD as a whole, our mean score for the composite score was 18.2. Science, you can see across the scores there of what they are. ELA is actually a combination of English reading and writing, and STEM is a combination of math and science, the score that we have there. And here is how the state did. So I'll give you a minute to look at that, and if you're like me, when I first looked at it, I thought, 6.8? We're better than the state at 6.2. The scale is 2 to 12 in the area of writing. And from the research that I found, 6 to 7, let's see, the average is 6 to 7, with 6 being at the 45th percentile and 7 being at the 65th percentile. So the average is 6 to 7 because it's a 2 to 12 scale, where the rest are 1 to 36 in their scoring, their scales.
And one of the issues that we have in the community is people are able to get their heads around ACT scores somehow a little bit better. It's not a 1 to 100 scale, so people see a 45 and say, aha, look at that, you're failing. There's something wrong with you. They realize it's not a 1 to 100 scale, so when they see a number like an 18 or a 19, they don't have a preconceived notion about what that means. They take a look at, okay, what is the average? Where's the growth, like Cara and Andy were talking about? How are you compared to last year? That's important.
Right.
That's what we're looking at, is where's the growth and how do we compare to other districts?
historical data.
Yeah, historical data. Are we doing better than we did last year, or than we did 5 years ago, or not as well? And how do we compare to other districts? That's important. An 18 or a 40 or a 63 is truly, in some respects, immaterial, except as we can compare it to other things, ourselves in the past, or the future, and other districts. So the ACT is easy for people to get their heads around. They hear and realize it's a scale of 1 to 36. 36 is literally every question right on all 4 of the subtests.
And I have to say we
Nobody in
had a
America
few
does
36.
that. There's
We
1
had-
or
I
2
think we had
children
2.
in the entire United States a year
So,
that do that. A
I
kid
think
who
we had
gets a
2.
30, go anywhere they want, any college they want in the United States of America. So an 18 is really good, and you're going to give us some, I'm sure,
More
additional
information.
data.
Andy,
Great.
did you have a question or
Yeah,
comment?
well, sort of a comment. I mean, this is all 11th graders that are taking this exam.
Excellent point. Yes.
So how many, our college-bound students can take the ACT multiple times and take their best
Correct.
scores. Is there one score that our college-bound students have to submit? Is it the first one? Is it the second one? Is it the third one? Versus those non-college-bound students that say, I have to take another test, I'm done, I'm never taking this again.
Right.
I think our numbers are skewed because of that. Other states don't require the ACT in 11th grade, so they're only
Right.
taking college-bound students.
Correct,
take that.
correct. There is a lot of interesting facts about the ACT and learning all of that. And thank you, Andy, for sharing. Let me skip one more thing
Sure.
quick. The state has chosen, this is not by ACT, the state has chosen to make the cut scores where our students have to get a 19 to be considered proficient. So I'm going to add one more thing in here. As Andy just mentioned, we test all of our students in 11th grade. Special ed students, regular students, students who have a hard time attending school, students, all of them, unless they take the alternate assessment. We test all of our students. The national ACT, and in most states that don't require it as a state test, these are college-bound students. I called the ACT and said, can you give me how the 11th graders, all 11th graders did that you tested? No. I asked the state, can you ask them to give us, so we can do a comparison to all 11th graders who test? No, they won't give it. The only information that we do have is that the ACT puts out is a national average, and this is the class of 2022, so most likely all seniors. Clark and I had the discussion today. We don't know if it's students who've taken multiple tests and this is all part of that data, or exactly what it is. There is no comparison that they will give us of which kids are college-bound and which kids are not college-bound, or what score is needed to be college-bound, except for the fact, if you look there at the national, which are mainly college-bound students being tested, you'll see that they are only scoring 19s, close to 20. And those are college-bound students where our state has said to us, everybody has to have a minimum of 19.
And I said this the last time you spoke, but having worked in admissions at a university, 19 to 24 is where you want your college-bound freshmen to be, at least. So 19 to 24 is a college-bound score. That is not a score that every student is going to get. And many of the students that reach that 19 to 24 score have taken this exam 3 times to get there.
But in Arizona, if you got even an 18.7 on the ACT,
You're
you would
failing.
be considered not,
Yeah,
you'd be
you failed.
partially proficient.
But you're going to be okay to go to NAU, ASU,
Correct.
and U of A.
Right,
And most other universities in
And
the United States.
probably Grand Canyon.
but we would
Probably most
consider you
other
only partially proficient.
And the state says those folks are failing, which this is the only place where we've got national comparisons for what Arizona has chosen as cut scores. So that calls into question for me the cut scores on the other tests. I can't say for sure they took the same approach. I don't know how they landed on this, but you're exactly right. If a kiddo gets 18 on the ACT, that's pretty good. That's pretty good. They're going to be able to go to a lot of universities in the United States. Arizona says, nope, failing. And then our community grasps that and uses it as a cudgel and says, you're not good enough. What we really want to do is what Cara said. Let's look and see what the growth is. And then what we've talked about all along, how do we compare to other districts? How do we compare to the state? That's useful data for us.
Yes,
I know
Cara.
the kids get their individual scores. We don't get a list of individuals'
We do.
We do,
scores.
yes.
So can't we just pick out the 11th graders?
So we do, with all the data that I'm sharing today, we have individual scores. I have an Excel spreadsheet that I can pull of all of them. So we could score, it could be, so tell me why would you want
We're
this?
just asking the state to, or the ACT to provide you with all the 11th grade scores. and that's-
For-
In Arizona.
In Arizona.
In Arizona.
Yeah.
Or,
Okay.
so they will provide a comparison in here, it shows ADE to Arizona, but when we look at the national average, what I ask ACT to do is, in your national data, can you release just the 11th graders that took it in spring of 2023?
So it's
to do a
direct-
like we have
comparison?
to.
Yeah.
Like we have to do the same level.
So
Does
are
that
we
make
going to
sense?
get a breakdown at some point with the 10th, 11th, 12th graders, how they did in each of these or not?
The only data that I receive from the state are the 11th graders who took it because they take it as part of a state assessment. The others are the voluntary taking
so
that,
they don't-
right.
Yeah, great question. To be clear, this is that mandatory one-day test. Every one of our
Yes.
11th graders just on that day. As Andy mentioned, many of these kids, they want to go to Stanford or whatnot, so they'll take this test 4 or 5 times. And they may have done, this may be their best effort that's included in these averages, but likely not.
Right. Thank you for asking those clarifying questions, though, because that's an important piece of all of this.
No, great question.
As well as a couple things that Cara had mentioned before about historical. We've only have 2 years of historical data, which is the next slide. However, this is the first year we looked at how we are as PUSD. However, we also have a separation this year because Genesis is an alternative school, so we can see how our Genesis students tested and our PHS students tested and see the impact of both schools on our district. So this was the breakdown of those. I do have to do a shout out to Christina Timchak, who is in charge of Genesis. She had more than 75% of those students who are a lot of dropout students, as students who don't come to school, who work jobs and all kinds of things. We had more than 75% of the students show up. And part of that is we offered multiple times to test. We tested at the high school. We got an approval from the state to do an evening testing. So she and her helper came here and spent an evening to help out those students who have jobs in the daytime and couldn't come, and they could come in and actually test, so.
And just to clarify for folks in the audience, Genesis is a dropout prevention program. So these are kids who essentially have dropped out of school and say, I'm done. I'm not doing this anymore. We say, no, come on. We can do this. Let's get across the finish line together.
Right.
Let's make it happen. Some of them graduated age 17 or 18 like their peers. They have all the way up to age 22 to get through this program with the assistance of Ms. Timchak and the folks who work for her in our online program to get there. So this is how they tested. When we tease that out, you can see there's a significant difference between kids who are in a place in their lives where they decided to drop out of high school and kids who have not dropped out of high school. But I love that, A, we got that many kids to do it, and B, these aren't terrible scores. They're not great. We don't want to shout this from the rooftops, but I'll tell you what, for kids who have dropped out of high school, the fact that they're scoring 14 for their composite on the ACT, That's
It
pretty
was awesome,
spectacular.
and just the encouragement of those students that, you know, you're not a dropout. We still want you to graduate. You're a part of our community, and that message that was sent to those kids, and it was an expectation for them to come. Not just like, well, if you can make time, come. No, it was an expectation that she held them to. So I thought that was exciting, and then this is just a comparison of last year. I could not separate PHS and Genesis because last year they were combined and not shown as separate schools. It wasn't an alternative school in 2022. Okay, any questions there?
Oh, wait, just let me get a picture.
Yeah.
Generally moving in the right direction, little bits, not by leaps and bounds, but generally moving in the right direction. That's what the data shows me overall, right? There's exceptions, as we've seen on all these slides, but overall.
We're moving along. So the ACT, or the AZ Sci, as I mentioned, is the science component that the state requires us to give. They do not use the science from the ACT or the ACT Aspire in any way. This is given in grades 5, 8, and 11. And I have to shout out to Diane Ryan for coming, who's our science specialist, to come and share and has been working with me on the data and how we can use this in our district a little bit more. Grade 5 measures 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade science. Grade 8 measures 6th, 7th, and 8th. And then 11th is high school science. So here is our PUSD results compared to Arizona for 2023. Let's see here. And then important to understand, last year when I presented, we didn't have the science data because they didn't have it done by the state. So I was able to contact them and go back and pull some of the data for 2022 as well here. And understanding that when I pull it from the platform, PAN platform, it's all FAE and non-FAE. So I also pulled the state data that included FAE and non-FAE in it as well as a comparison here.
And one of the things I've noticed as we've gone through this presentation is, if I'm looking at scores like a 32 and I'm thinking in terms of a 100-point scale, oh my gosh, we're biting down hard in science. What's happening here? We mentioned earlier that one of the comparisons that's useful for us once we have the full statewide data, which we don't at this point, is to compare ourselves to other districts. One of the comparisons we did is for last year's science scores, which you can see there. Of 139 districts that had reported science scores, PUSD ranked 20th among those districts, which puts us in the top 14.39% in the state. That's not bad. That's actually, of the 3 areas, science, ELA, and math, that's the highest of any of the areas. The science test is darn hard is what that tells us. And we do a pretty good job in all those areas. In science, we were the top 14% in the state among districts. This is, again, last year. We don't have this year's data for other districts yet. In ELA, we're in the top 16% among all districts statewide. And in math, we're in the top 24% among all districts statewide. We are firmly in the top tier of districts. Are we going to rest on our laurels, or our lawyers? Let's not rest on our lawyers at all. We're going to rest on our laurels and say, job well done, pat ourselves on the back, that's it, let's just slide to the finish line. Absolutely not. As soon as the data comes out, we start talking about how can we get better, how can we do even better. But the narrative in the community that PUSD is failing and things aren't going well is simply false.
And what Mr. Cheney's talking about, we'll get that. That was part of the new academic part of the Auditor General's report, if you had ELA data or math. So in March of this upcoming year, we will get the comparison from actually this year, the data, and we can find out exactly again, we fell in the top 15% of, in this test and that test. And so that's the new aspect of the Auditor General's report.
And again, those comparisons are most useful. The growth that we've talked about, very, very important, useful data. How we compare to the state and how we compare to other districts, very, very important, useful data. Where we are on a scale of 1 to 36 or a scale of 1 to 100 or a scale of 1 to 42, that's almost meaningless.
And the information Mr. Tenney did say is only public schools, because charter schools do not have to be looked at from the Auditor General. So it's 215 public schools that we're in the top part of.
And finally, are there any clarifications or questions that the board members may have?
I didn't think the Auditor General did achievement scores.
They take the achievement data. The Auditor General is what monitors and enforces our education laws. they compare districts and report that out. And so they added achievement data to their comparison data on the Auditor General's report. So they take the achievement data from these tests and now compares us to districts. And that's where Mr. Tenney was getting, we fall in the 14th% of all districts. But it's important to know that Skyview or those other schools are not part of that information because charters don't have to have the spending report that the Auditor General does.
And also, I think it's important to know what those achievement groups, those achievement peer groups are made up of. Because Prescott has fallen into a group that may not be in an accurate achievement data set group. I mean, we can complain about it as the board. It's what the state uses, and they're going to use their data that they have. But I think, is it based on poverty levels?
It's based on
That smaller subset you're talking about is part of the Auditor General's report. Yeah, go ahead.
it's based on our city or our PUSD boundaries poverty level,
Poverty levels.
not our student
Not on our
poverty
families who
level.
have students in the district.
And so we're in a district that has a higher poverty level than many of the districts that we're compared against. And so you'll notice if you, I have the data here if you want to look at it, but if you look at some of these districts, these are things, places like Scottsdale, Catalina Foothills, Tanque Verde, Gilbert, Deer Valley, so some places that have really high levels of income and different demographics than our student data is. So just, again, the state uses the data that they're going to use, but I think that's something that needs to be taken in context.
It seems to be misleading, using the state data, but
Yeah.
maybe if the interventions are working, then let's do more of interventions.
That's a great segue. So,
Great lead-in.
Renee, what a terrific presentation, super thorough. Can we give her a hand real quick? So overall, again, trend line up, generally speaking, fairly solid in many respects. Compared to the rest of the state, we're doing quite well. The question you might have in your mind is that good enough? And the answer is firmly, absolutely not. That is not good enough. So what do we do about that? What are we doing all the time to get better? And that's what Shelley's part of the presentation is about.
Hello. How are you guys? Doing good? Yep. Okay. All right, yes, I'm here to talk about academic interventions, and my name's Shelley Reed. I'm our district intervention coordinator. That was a new role as of last year, and so I'm here tonight to just kind of give you an overview of what interventions look like in our classrooms, academic interventions. So I started with this, that we are a district that practices data-informed instruction, and our goal is to increase student achievement. So we've been talking a lot, so it is a nice segue with Renee's data presentation. That data-informed instruction just means that we are always looking at data to help us, data on students, to help us think about what interventions they need, what kind of support, and then to look at data again after maybe we've worked with a student to see if they need more or less and where they're at. To increase student achievement, I'm just going to reiterate what has been said. We talked about growth. And so I think about, the first day of school is coming up, and as that teacher, when you get those students, some of them are right at grade level. They're ready to access that grade level content. Some of them are below, and some are above. And so when we think about increasing student achievement, we're thinking about, I'm going to take every student, I'm going to think about where they're at and moving them forward and looking at their growth. And so sometimes when we think about student achievement, it's not, can they finish, at their grade level? We want to try to meet them where they're at and move them. And that's why we do interventions. Oh, it's just a little slow. So we have lots. So where do we begin? We begin with all this assessment data, and Renee spent a lot of time on that top one, state assessments. It gives us some useful information, but sometimes as teachers, it's not great for drilling down and looking at the student needs support here, or I've got this really high achiever and I'm going to enrich them here. So we use these other pieces to help us. And so Galileo's our benchmark. We screen all our kindergartners to kind of let us know where they're at when they come to us. Renaissance is our suite of products that provide reading and math assessment. They give us great reports, instructional reports. Our diagnostic tests are mainly used by your interventionists. Those drill down to the real nitty-gritty. They need help on this skill. And then our curriculum often provides unit assessments that helps us with how did they do on these standards, exit tickets, and formative assessments.
And Shelley, if I can just jump in really quick. Linda brought up a really good point in the first part of the presentation, which was if the state level data is not that useful to us, and in some respects, you make a good point. We sometimes refer to it as the autopsy report.
Right.
We get it right at the end of the year. Those kids are already done for the year. We can't really dig into it until the summer. There's not much we could do about what happened with kids last year. A lot of forward looking, and you're talking about that here. But so one of your questions you asked is, why don't we do our own assessment during the great question. And the answer is we do a ton of it. And here's 7 examples of that right there, I think.
Yeah. That state assessment is good overview, and you can look at trends. But yeah, as a classroom teacher, you want more dialed in stuff.
Do we put those up on the website, or are you considering that some of the interventions are being used? That would be one of your good white papers there.
Yeah, great question. The Galileo data, we will often report to parents in aggregate. Here's how third grade is doing. Here's how they did at the beginning of the year. Here's where they're at now, et cetera. But it's data that people don't have a frame of reference for, so it's not something we typically put. Here's our in-house midterm testing. Here's how we did on the website. We haven't done that in the past, although we've reported to parents.
I'm thinking that perhaps that will start to align the divide so that parents and the community understands a little bit better if they can go in on the website or hear it on your podcast or whatever, This might be a teachable moment.
Good thought. That's a good thought.
And Renee was kind of chiming in a little bit, which is appreciated. We have lots of reports that we can get from these assessment systems that we can send home to parents. Renaissance provides some good reports for teachers, instructional reports that they can use, but also growth reports that they can send home to parents. So the next piece then, so we've got that data that we want to look at. Remember, we're thinking about how we are data informed and how we want to increase student achievement. So our district does a really good job of providing collaboration time. We have PLCs that our teachers work in, and they can look different, and we kind of like work in and out of them all the time. And so sometimes it's a teacher and an instructional coach talking about how can I work with my class. Here's some data. We have grade level content area meetings happening all the time. They're put into the schedule. They're regular, and we're doing a really good job with the protocols. With our PLC training last year, those are just getting better. Vertical articulation happens where we're looking at, like, say, a 5th grade content team might talk to the 6th grade above them and the 4th grade below. They're vertically looking at how does our curriculum align, and what are you guys seeing? What can we do to bolster these students, and those kinds of things. A big thing that came up was more of a emphasis on curriculum gap analysis, and that is just looking at our curriculum. We've adopted some new curriculum. Is it meeting our needs? And if not, what can we do so that it can help meet our needs? Is it doing a great job, and what can we replicate from that? There's site level meetings happening, MTSS meetings, and MTSS, and I probably should have put the words up there, is multi-tiered systems of support. No, multi-tiered system of supports. Got the wrong plural there. So, and we'll talk a little bit about those, but those are those problem-solving meetings when we're really trying to help students and find out where their needs are. One little, I'll mention, I've met with all the principals before the school year started, and I was talking with Adam Neely at the high school, and he said one of the best meetings that he had was with just his 9th grade teachers. Didn't matter what content, but he met with the 9th grade teachers, and they all were able to get together and just talk about what are we seeing with these 9th grades, with these freshmen, and it just really, I think those teachers were able to get together and say, yeah, I'm seeing the same thing. What do you suggest? How can we work with these? Okay, so any questions so far? Am I talking too fast?
No.
Shelley, I have
Good
just
job.
one real quick.
Uh-oh, okay.
No. So on the vertical articulation, and we've seen this issue with the 7th and 8th grade math scores
Okay.
for years. Can you specifically speak to that, kind of what types of approaches we've taken? Maybe Andy, you want to chip into with Mile High?
I think, yeah, and Andy can definitely speak to it. Sometimes it's teacher retention too. And so if you've taught a subject or a grade for a little while, you get to know it, and you get to know it better and what things to do. And so we've seen some turnover in the math department, and so I think that can definitely lead to, if you have a new teacher and maybe they're not familiar with the curriculum or the standards, and then they're learning it themselves, as they're teaching.
Yeah, and I'll add, not only is it the turnover, but I think it was 3 or 4 years ago, the board approved a math intervention teacher at Mile High to address some of these scores. And this upcoming year is the first year we'll be able to fill that position. Every year we had that posted. Sometimes we were able to fill it, but then we weren't able to fill another math position and had to move what we had hired, the math intervention teacher, to the other position just because that was a higher priority. So unfortunately, the last couple of years we went without a separate math intervention class. We were able to shift some things around. Shelley worked quite a bit with our math department this past year to address some of those like intervention within the classroom, since we weren't able to have a completely separate pull-out class.
And our district admin team has been talking actively about what we can do to address that turnover piece, both the recruiting piece and the retention piece, particularly for middle school math. There's only so many people in the world who want to be teachers, and very few of them want to be teachers in Arizona, and very few of them want to teach middle school, and of them, there's very few who teach math. And what can we do different than we're doing to get middle school math teachers in Arizona to stick around with us for more than a couple of years is an important discussion to have that we've already started to have. So Shelley's going to talk with us about some just key things, 25 things that we're doing to get our math scores up. But there's some reality in the personnel situation that we need to address as well.
And a good example of that is Kelsey brought in some trainers from ADE last year that really dug into depth of knowledge of questions and how to be structuring those questions in the classroom. And then when you have turnover, you lose that great training. It was really good training. So we really are looking at this retention piece. There's definitely an effect there.
We've got some creative solutions that we'll bring to you later in the year. Has to do with money.
Okay, so then what? So we have this lovely graphic. And so I mentioned before MTSS, and this is not all about MTSS, but this is definitely a part of intervention. So MTSS is multi-tiered system of supports. And often we, as a school, as a site, we have an MTSS team, and they talk about students, and it's a problem-solving team. Last year, I was able to facilitate an MTSS committee district-wide. We had representatives from all the schools, including our Discovery Gardens, and the district office. And we came together, we were trying to enhance the MTSS process and see what we could do to streamline it. So they adopted this graphic, and what this graphic provides us with is a common language when we think about how we're talking about the support we're providing for students. And so this also represents the tiers that MTSS stands for. So how many tiers are there? 3, right? So it's very clear, right? There's 3 tiers.
Good
okay?
math.
Good job.
And they're called tier 1, 2, and 3.
Would you like to teach math at Mile High Middle School?
Middle school?
So I'll go a little bit more in depth, and this plays into interventions because, again, this is our common language that we use when we're talking with teachers. And so tier 1 is universal. It's all our students in the class. And I have another slide that kind of speaks to it specifically what that looks like. But that's our main level. It's our core curriculum, and it's standards driven. So all our students that are in our class, we're teaching those grade level standards. And so the 80 to 90, we'll get into that a little bit, but I know it says all, and then you're like, well, 80 to 90 is not all. What happens is this tier 1, when it's implemented very effectively, it works for 80 to 90% of our students. They're successful, and they don't need any additional support. We're doing things in the classroom to support them, but it's working for 80 to 90% of them. Tier 2 is more targeted, and it's for about 5 to 15% of students that might need some additional or extra support. Still standards-based. It's specific skills. Sometimes it's quick little catch-up students. And then we get to the third tier, which is more intensive. It's more individualized, very customized. So we're thinking about those 80 to 90% of our students. Tier 1 instruction. This is where our basic interventions happen, basically. And we're asking classroom teachers to provide these interventions. And so it's universal, it's primary, it's our core, it's a school-wide system of support. It really is. It's got to be on all levels. Everybody in the school is dedicated to this, and we're supporting the needs of all students. Now again, there's going to be some students that need more, so that's the 80 to 90. 80 to 90 will respond to this and get what they need. Specifically, when we think about a teacher that's teaching one of these classes, a core class, they are differentiating their instruction for those students that need it. They might be providing some accommodations, some scaffolds, basic interventions, grouping, and we often can just use a screening assessment to help us, or it can be those formative assessments in class, like those in-the-moment checks. They can get a lot of their strategies or ideas from grade level meetings. They meet as a grade level or content area, and they might talk about, some kids aren't kind of getting this, what's something I could do in tomorrow's lesson, or what can I look ahead? And they can talk that through and implement that in the classroom, and 80 to 90% of the students, ideally, are responding to it and are successful. And there's always that ongoing parent communication piece of this is what we're doing, this is what it looks like, and this is how we're supporting students. Good? All right. So the next tier, tier 2, is very targeted, and it's those 5 to 15 that aren't quite getting, the tier 1. And so this is where our interventionists come in, and they might provide interventions. We might use volunteers depending on what we need. It's targeted instruction to a skill. We've noticed something they're lacking here or something like that. Students at this point are working to kind of catch up with their peers. And we might do some diagnostic assessment. We might pull in the math or reading interventionists and say, hey, do you have a different kind of test? Can we dig in a little deeper? Renaissance provides some of those diagnostics too, and it might just be setting a time, meeting with an instructional coach or meeting with me, and we look at and see, what kind of skill gaps we have. There's more progress monitoring. That just means after we've implemented something, we want to monitor them again and see if they're progressing. And then at this point, we usually bring in different people for those meetings, like, of course, grade level, because a lot of times they have ideas, but interventionists and other specialists, and we continue with ongoing parent communication. So I think when I think about Lincoln and the success with Lincoln, this is where they really got it dialed in. They were able to, and I'll speak about wind time later, and maybe you can tell us what it looked like when I talk about wind time. But they were really able to get the tier 2 to work really well, and the communication, because you can imagine you're bringing in different people. You might have some parapros that are coming into your room, they're pushing in. Some kids are getting pulled out. There's a lot of transition. Teachers might be sharing students. One teacher might say, I can teach this, and I have this great activity. The other might say, I'll do this group, and I'll, teach them this. You might have some students on a computer doing an online program that targets a skill or something like that. So it takes a lot to kind of get it to work. Yes?
Is that more like an individualized learning then that we're using as an intervention here with the kids, or is it more tier 1.
So, this is, think small group.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So another good example is if I have some intervention time set aside, I'm gonna say, these 7 students need skill with multiplying. And I notice these need this skill. And I'm gonna work with my partner teacher, and we might split these kids up. And then some kids are gonna get pulled during this time as well by the math interventionist, or, we're working like that to, so it's not necessarily during that core time. It's kind of a different set aside time. So the last tier is tier 3, and this is 1 to 5% of students. The reason that the percentages are important, I think, is because sometimes I have talked with classroom teachers, and they're like, everybody needs, say it's a 5th grade teacher, and everybody needs this 3rd grade skill, and so I need some interventionists in here. If everyone truly needs this, it's a tier 1. It's you look at, it might seem like, oh, because they're 5th graders, but this skill that they're needing is 3rd grade. You're like, oh, it's tier 3. I need all this support. It's unfortunately something happened, and it's a tier 1 intervention that you need to provide. You need to look at maybe before the lesson, giving a little background information or background knowledge, or kind of bolstering what they know before the lesson. So that's why these numbers are important, because we don't want your whole class in tier 3. That's not the idea. That would be difficult, right? So tier 3 is intensive, it's few, it's individualized. Ideally, when you kind of look at this, ideally it's 1 to 2 students per group, and that is hard to do sometimes. We've got some very skilled interventionists, though, and I work with them in thinking about, Shelley, I've got 6 students, and they're tier 3, and, I'm supposed to be at 1 to 2, and I tell them, try to be at 1 to 2, 1 to, So we talk about how can we do that, and so sometimes we get other volunteers or parapros that can help. They're pretty skilled too at running small groups, and so they can have a small group going. They could take that 6 and maybe divide them in 2, and so it's really ideally, though, if we can get it close to one-on-one, because there's some significant, deficits, I would say, that we're trying to fill those needs. This is also where MTSS comes into play, where often we're looking at these tier 3 students. What can we do? It's a problem-solving team meeting where we get grade level teachers, interventionists, specialists together. More frequent progress monitoring.
Shelley, I really
Yes.
appreciate you mentioning kind of how individualized this is. You were asking about that a minute ago, Linda, and you can see, just in practical terms, we can't hire this many people to sit around until we get to the part of the day. So fortunately, we are positioned here in Prescott, Arizona, where there are hundreds of people who are willing to volunteer and come to our schools. Some of the things you've been talking about, we've had it in place for years, but you're talking about, a different approach to that, an additional approach to that, which is fantastic. Man, we appreciate that. Can you see how well your ideas fit in with the structure that we've already got for that? I love it.
Good.
So, putting it all together, so we're thinking about those assessments we talked at the beginning, right? We had the state assessments, and Renee talked about those. We have other assessments that we use. Some are benchmark that we do 3 times a year. We do some progress monitoring. We've got those exit tickets and things that teachers are always looking at. And then we've built in time, collaboration time, into our schedule so teachers can get together, teams can get together and talk about students and plan. And then we have an understanding of the 3 tiers. And so what's cool is we also have dedicated staff to support teachers and students. And so, and Andy mentioned it too, we have a middle school math interventionist, which is awesome. Candy Shaft is her name, and we've already met, and we're working together. So we have K through 8 reading and math interventionists and parapros. A lot of them are trained in some of our specific, programs like letters. And those interventionists are top notch. They come from the classroom, they've been highly effective in the classroom, and so they are a great resource, not only to the students that they serve, but to our teams, to when we collaborate, to the teachers that need ideas. And then we have our instructional coaches, same kind of idea. They've come from the classroom, they're highly effective. They help the interventionists as well as the teachers. And then in my role, I'm kind of able to support all of these people and kind of help principals as well implement intervention plans. Also, we have dedicated intervention time, and so it's called WIN time, what I need. And so what's awesome is that, you know, Karen's here and she's going to speak to maybe what that looks like, what it looked like at Lincoln, and she's bringing WIN time to Granite. And so it's where we have those Tier 1 interventions in classrooms. We can pull out groups for Tier 2 and Tier 3. And do you want to talk about, you know, how you made all those moving parts work so wonderfully?
Sure. Well, it's going to be hard to live up to like all the kudos you all were giving me. That was awesome. I hope it's fancy enough. Thank you. I appreciate that. I also want to say first, just a huge thank you for giving me my new job, because it's awesome and I love it. So just wanted to let you know. Yes, WIN time. And there's even, you can even Google, there's a book, there's a couple principals that have worked on this. It's been around for a long time. 15 years ago when Teresa Russo was my principal and I was teaching, it was called Walk to Read. And the idea was really, and it's changed names, right? You're nodding, it's changed, right? It's changed a million different things. But the main idea is you get, no matter the level of that student, you get that student in a small group with a qualified adult for a good good frequency, 4 days a week, 3 days a week, 20 minutes, 5 days a week. That's an intervention. And so, and it doesn't matter if they're high, low, in the middle, whatever it might be, content area, but you get them that small group time. And so it's morphed over the years, and we've done a million things. When we first did Walk to Read 15 years ago, it was like every second grader went and they got 20 minutes or 45 minutes at their level, and you pulled in all your staff, right? You trained your janitor to help, right? When we weren't outsourcing anything, right? You pulled in all your parapros and all your stuff to be able to divide up all those kids and get them an adult. So, but it's changed a lot. So WIN time has what it has morphed into. And at Granite, we just had a great meeting today and we announced it yesterday, but we used to, there's again, a carved out time, 5 days a week. It's called enrichment. We've changed it to WIN because all the elementary schools are using that WIN time. So we're going to call it the same thing. And it really comes down to just making sure you are prioritizing that carved out hour 5 days a week or 4 days a week. You don't let anything touch that time. You protect that time. And then you put kids in those groups based on where they are. And you don't review that twice a year. You review that often. And so those groups can be fluid. So when Shelley's explaining the tiers, you might have those kids that knowingly, we all have some Title I helpers, some Title I math helpers, Title I reading helpers, that kind of thing. You've got those folks, and you know my very, very lowest, and we aren't talking about SPED or IEPs in any of this, right? Separate conversation. So you take those lows in my room, and I go, well, I know those 4 are going to a Title I reading teacher, and then I know the next 4 up are going to a corrective reading teacher, and then I know that next little group is going to a para that can provide that support. We've been doing that for a long, long time. I think what we have honed in on is all the students that are in that now Tier 1 and Tier 2, middle of the road, they're not in SPED, they're not low, they might not be high, but they're right in there going, which way are you gonna help me grow? Am I going up or am I going down? So we've gotten so much better at that group, right? So now we take, okay, who are the adults that are left? I've got every gen ed teacher, certified teacher in that grade level left. So now I'm gonna mix up all those kids, whether I've got 4 classes in 2nd grade, 3 classes in 2nd grade, 2 classes. Now I'm gonna mix up all those kids using data, and I'm gonna go, this teacher's really awesome at the highs, that's who you get. This teacher's really awesome at those high achievers, but maybe they're kind of, apathetic or don't really know what they want to do. They're going to attack them. And now I'm going to take these middle of the road kids that we call them bubble kids. They could bubble up, they could go down, we don't know. And I'm going to give them a teacher, right? If I've got anybody else in the room, I'm going to break that down even farther. So I make jokes and say the best thing I do is I don't take no for an answer, and I try to say yes all the time.
to teachers going, can I do this, can I do that? Or teacher going, wait, I have 32 kids, I don't need another body in my room, please just leave me alone, I know exactly where my kids are, I know what I'm doing, and it's all good. And I don't take that for an answer either. And so we just go, you know what, everybody, it doesn't matter what kind of learner or what level you are, you get an adult 4 days a week for an hour. Now, teachers get real creative about how they use those human resources, now they use their time resources. But they work within that parameter of the schedule that we've come up with, the consistency. I think it was Andy, you were saying, I wrote down the word barge. Sometimes this growth can look like a barge, right? It's not overnight. We tried to implement this kind of the first year back from COVID, and we didn't get to finish. We got started, we spread all these kids out, and then we were quarantining all the time. So then we had to cohort these kids, right? So then the next year, so we kind of had to scrap it. The next year, I'm like, we're doing the win time again. I've got teachers going, just leave me alone. I know what my kids say, Mom, you know. I'm like, I love you, but we're going to try it again. And got rolling, had to do a little bit more quarantining, but got to finish the second half of the year really in good shape, where all these kids, everybody was healthy enough to just spread out and go and be with all these other folks. So this year, I think the reason we had such growth and the reason that the data looks so good, and I sit here and just want to weep, and I wish I could go be with that team and celebrate this, and we've done a lot of it, is they were so trusting, and we said, okay, year 3, when I think about the barge, we went, I go, year 3, we know the recipe, let's not stray. Don't do anything new, but if you say to me, oh, wait, but I just want this little group, and I know them so well, and just leave me alone, I'm going to go, nope. If your data says that, awesome, keep them. If your data does not say that, you're splitting them up, and they're going to the expert that they need. We got to stay consistent. Part of that was just everybody stayed healthy, nobody's quarantining, nobody's anything, people are starting to come to school more. I think that's a huge reason why it worked this year, because we had really been playing this game for 3 years, and we finally got people in the place of going, I see how it works. And as soon as a teacher feels that, wait, I have all these kids and I met everybody's needs today, kind of, sort of, with my team, you feel good, you start riding that wave, it's very motivating. So we just got to stay consistent this year. And we just really started off going, we're no whining, and they weren't whining, but you know what I mean? It's like, let me just have my comfort routines. And it was like, nope, we got this, we're gonna do this. And then we trained support staff, parapros. Those kids got in front of an expert consistently, and I really do. I mean, I don't know if it sounds simple. It sounds simple to me, but I go, we got a little bit of luck we had with everybody stayed healthy. We had a very normal school year, and we didn't give up on the routines. We kept going, it's working, it's not working very quickly. And then this year we just had some great jumps with those kids. So,
Yay.
in a nutshell. So thank you. Let me talk about that. I should have asked the questions though. Okay.
We'll shout them at you.
I'll be
So lastly, there's some other elements in place that maybe don't fit in the box of the classroom, or they look a little different. We're, trying some things. So definitely tutoring. We have a robust tutoring program, and it's only getting better. Summer school provides opportunities for interventions. We're using data. We have, oftentimes our math and reading interventionists are the teachers there, and they're providing those services. Grant opportunities, I know often when we look at grants and apply for them, we're looking for people. We're looking for those support people. Like Karen said, we need those trained individuals. The move towards standards-based learning is helping teachers and students gain clarity about what it means to be proficient and creating those proficiency scales. They know what I need to do to get better and to meet the standard. And so that's helping everybody, I think. We have some online programs that we're using. One is Zern that we buy all the time, and it matches our math program. And you have the ability with that to assign some foundational lessons, which help fill in gaps, and you can assign higher level lessons. So if you're trying to meet the needs, and enrich students. After school clubs often provide some academic, we provide some academic ones with school clubs. It kind of depends who wants to provide them. Volunteers, I know that's a big thing, and lots of schools are using volunteers to help. And then our curriculum, if I'm not able to be on those committees, I'm always letting Kelsey know, does it have intervention? Does it have enrichment embedded? And they do, they have those pathways for teachers right there. It's embedded in the curriculum. Any questions so far? Okay, so I just have a summary. I don't have a question slide like Renee, I forgot. But we have a lot going on in interventions. It's more than just thinking about, I'm going to pull this kid for reading. There's a lot behind it. It's very intentional. But we know that we can do more, and so we're always, and that's part of what I like about my role is being able to step back and reflect and evaluate how are we doing, what's working, and where can we do better and do more and help those kiddos.
Can I ask a favor then of board members or really anybody in the room or anybody who's online? We've just heard literally 2 hours of terrific information. It matches well with some of the things you hear in the community, and in other respects, it doesn't match well with some of the things you hear in the community. Next time you have a conversation with somebody who says, I read this on Facebook, or I saw a 35-word rant in the paper, and PUSD is falling apart at the seams, and they're not doing a thing about it. Will you either literally or metaphorically put your arm around their shoulder and say, I get the emotion behind that, but there's some reality. I heard 2 hours of it, and the test scores aren't that bad. There's really nothing to compare to other states within Arizona. We know they're doing fairly well, and they are doing things about it every day in so many ways to make it better. We should probably stop beating up on them and help them a little bit. Would you do that for me?
Done. So I have a question. One, so what do we do for the students that come in mid-year, whether from another school coming in? How are you involved in assessing them and then getting them up to speed if you can? Obviously, we've got a state assessments going on or whatnot. Have you found time and what does that effort look like?
That's a good question, and they wouldn't be Fay, right? So it doesn't matter. No, I'm just kidding. Good. I didn't know if I would go. So, right? Yeah, we wait till next year.
Thank you for coming this evening.
That's what happened for the full year.
It depends the grade level, of course, but we use Galileo as our benchmark, and so that helps us. And within Galileo, we've shown teachers how to use the intervention report. And so as soon as we can, hopefully if they come in around that benchmark time, that gives us a big clue into where they are because Galileo is state standards. Mm-hmm. It's those grade level standards. And so we can also use that to compare to their peers, in their class and kind of see where they're at. And so often, definitely K-8, we can, if needed, put them with an interventionist, provide, but it starts in the classroom with the tier 1. It really does. It's like, okay, this new kiddo, they're trying to, adapt and get used to school. Sometimes it's just that, but we start with those tier 1s. We hopefully can do a Renaissance test, a STAR math, a STAR reading, and see where they're at with their level. And often when we talked about those problem-solving teams that meet, the cool thing too is with those interventionists based at our schools, a teacher can talk to someone and an interventionist say, hey, I just got this kid, this is what I'm seeing. And often they're like, you know what, I have room in this group. Do you want to put them in and let's see? And so we kind of do that kind of stuff. It's really all hands on deck with that kind of stuff.
That's tremendous. And so just ballpark it, what's the percentage like of those students that fall not in that 80 and 90% that you actually do the interventions with that are coming in mid-year? What are you kind of assessing? Yeah.
I would say we get a mixed bag. I don't know a percentage, but I feel like we get a mixed bag of transfer students, and where they fall.
That's good to hear. Great.
I don't know if anyone else has any information on transfer students.
Can I add to that a teeny
Yes,
bit?
for sure.
I would say it is, and let me just say, in the K-3 setting, those kids, because we don't know where they are with critical reading skills, they're given those real quick assessments right away in the first few days that they get there. And because we really need to know, and it's hard to tell what their language is like and how can they read and all that kind of stuff. So in the younger kids, we get them right away. The other piece of that is, oh my gosh, I just lost your question.
just
Transfer
how many kids, like,
Yes,
yeah.
I would say, again, in the elementary, I'm gonna say at least, I'm gonna say, in the last 5 years, I'm gonna say it could be probably 70% I would call low.
Wow.
Not at grade level, not where they should be. And that we're seeing largely because of COVID and economy and all of that kind of stuff. They're, more times than not, they're coming in already diagnosed or with an IEP or identified on some level, or they're coming in low. It's pretty rare that we get somebody, it's kind of just an odd situation that you might get somebody and go, real stable families, stable home environment, and they've moved for a job maybe, and that kid's coming in gifted or right at grade level. It's not, I might be guessing low.
No, that's great information, thanks, Karen.
Yeah, we don't have a lot of kids that move in and out.
Super well said. It's a mixed bag in general, for sure, but more lowies. Partway through the year, there's a couple of charter schools in town particularly that will counsel kids out who weren't achieving as well, to be frank. There's a couple of other charter schools where parents, they love the program. And some parents say, wow, you know, maybe my kid needs less knitting and more reading. And so they come to us, and the fact that they've been knitting a bunch is terrific, but they don't read as well. So the kids that we get transferring in from some of our other charter schools, they're behind a bit. We got to catch them up. It's not that they're not capable, it's not been as rigorous as PUSD. And then Karen's right as well. Our more transitory families don't often come with kiddos who are super high achievers. Sometimes they do. Sometimes dad just happened to get one of the 4 engineering jobs in Prescott and moved here in April, and everything's great. But more often we get somebody who just moved from California and they're like, oh, school started for you August 1st, here it is September 15th. Sorry, I didn't realize. We get some of that too. So yeah, a lot of our transfer kids are kids we have to catch up a little bit.
Can I add to answer your question in a way, kind of underscores everything we've talked about the last couple hours. You know, the state assessments are a tool. Are they the best tool? Probably not, but they're a tool that we can look at. But everything that Shelley talked about, those assessments, I mean, we spent 2 hours and we barely scratched the surface. You know, there's so much data coming in every day, every week. And to answer your question about how do we assess those, we're not going to wait for a state assessment to come in. It's those weekly PLCs, it's the exit tickets. I mean, that info is coming in constantly, and teachers are going to be looking at that going, okay, we have a new student, we've already done some formative assessments, some, like I said, exit tickets or a Galileo benchmark, and so we have that data now we're looking at. Okay, now we get them into a different reading group or whatever it might be. So that's the beauty of, you know, the state assessments tell us one thing, but all the interventions and all that data really tell us that's where the magic is happening.
Thanks, Andy.
Yeah.
That's great.
Did you have a question, Carl?
I just have one very broad comment. With our math scores continuing to from 3rd grade to 8th grade kind of declining, when or are we looking at a different math curriculum that might be better for our students?
It's the only thing left, isn't it?
No?
Yeah, that's
Okay, just wanna
that's
put it
not
out
my
there.
question. I can't answer that question.
Okay, just putting it
We've
out.
had so much fun with curriculum adoption recently.
That
So,
should go pretty well.
Cara, you know, the truth is, middle school is a conundrum that's really got us baffled, and curriculum may be the next thing we need to take a look at.
Okay. I just want
there's-
to make sure, I just want it to be on the table.
Yes.
It
it's-
absolutely is one of the things.
Another
Thank you.
factor is, we believe, the structure of our honors programs starting in 5th grade, and we've made a change this year in that. And it goes back to that idea that we're testing kiddos on content they learned 2 years ago because they're honors and they've accelerated through, and the expectation that they can remember the specifics of, 7th grade math when they took it 2 years ago doesn't jive. So we are looking at that. That's another thing. We are looking at this teacher turnover, but it may be time for us to take a look at the curriculum.
Nothing's
thank
off the
you.
table. Nothing. It's a great question. Am I convinced that that's the main issue? Personally, I'm not, but nothing is off the table, and we're going to move the needle.
Okay,
The only,
let's stop this conversation
yeah,
and
just
go on.
one thing, and not to add to it, and not to have another 2-hour thing. At some point, because in the past I've heard allegations about Galileo being certain things that some people will look at and say these Galileo tests show that we're failing. Maybe an explanation down the road somewhere of what Galileo data means, how it should be interpreted, what it's really used for, instead of this is an achievement that my student's failing at, you know, it's because that's not what it's for. But some people believe that that's what it is, and I think we need to publicly air that out, make sure we understand that.
I can't believe Facebook all the time.
It's been in the past. It was really during COVID that came out, that I saw it, but that's just when I started on the board, so, yeah. That would be my request.
Cool.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank
Yes.
you.
Okay, are we doing okay?
I'm good.
Do you want to plow through? Do you want to take 5 minutes?
We
No,
don't
I
have
don't
a
want
lot.
to take 5 minutes
Okay.
unless you want to
Okay.
push this stuff off to the next meeting.
No,
I'm-
I would like to keep
Let's
moving
skip
if
it.
we can.
Wish we could not
How
cover
about-
what we
how
told
about
the
we skip
public
this
we'd cover,
next
but.
one?
Well,
Okay, now, never mind.
our next item is the summary of current events with Mr. Tenney.
Okay, I'll go quickly. We had convocation yesterday, I guess it was. All of our staff members gathered together. We had about 450-ish folks in the room and had really a positive time kicking things off in a real positive way, I think. We heard from our board president. All of you were there. Thank you so much for that. You don't need me to go into further detail there because you saw it all happen. And I know that people feel your support when you're there. It's great to I mean, again, sometimes people are out of town, can't be there, but the fact that you were all there showing, hey, we care about you and we're providing steady leadership for this district means a ton. Thank you so much. I also heard from a bunch, I was going to read these things, but I won't. I heard from virtually every one of our principals today about enrollment is going well, the high school, I mean, you can't tell until you get fannies in the seats, but they're thinking they may be up an additional 50 kids over last year, which is enormous. Each one of our schools that has schedules, been handing out schedules. That's been super positive. We've had some meet the teacher pieces already happen. Some additional ones are happening tomorrow. There's a lot of excitement building for the school year coming up. Those are our main current events. One other thing I want to make you aware of, just give you a quick update. Late last week I gave you a superintendent's board report telling you that we had a kind of a bubble in third grade. It's a problem, but it's a good problem. We may be looking at hiring a new teacher. We made our decision today that we will be expanding an additional section of third grade at Abaya Judd and looking to get a teacher there. We've got a couple of leads that we're pretty positive about, but we will start the year there. We've got one of our former recently retired Abaya Judd teachers who said, I'll start the year off for it's Nancy Wheeler. I'll start the year off for you. I'll get you started. I'll provide some stability. We'll get some routines in place. We'll get those kids where they're going to be, with whom they're going to be, other than their teacher, from day one. And then as soon as we find the right person, we'll plug that person in and do some good things.
Just a quick aside to that,
Yeah.
the foundation has agreed to supply that classroom. So we're not going to have kids come over from Lincoln bringing a little, we have to take a pack of markers away from Lincoln to bring it to the new one. We're going to
Great.
supply it.
Oh, that's
Nice.
fantastic.
Already made a decision to do that.
Thank
I don't
you
know
so
if you knew
much for that.
Sam, but we have.
That's wonderful. So we feel like we're being really responsive to a need there and trying to be as proactive as we can. We hope that everybody who said they're coming is actually coming. If not, there'll be $80,000 less to give to people in raises at the end of the year for reasons that were shaky, but we're feeling pretty solid about making the right move, and it's the best thing for kids. Every decision we make, what's best for kids, we feel like, okay, we're going to do it. So we'll get back with you on whom we're hiring, and of course, we'll ask you to, as we always do with personal actions, ratify that when the time comes.
Okay, thank you.
That's it.
Governing board members, anything to report? We were all at convocation. Go ahead, Linda.
Yeah, we were all at
Liked
that.
it.
It was good to attend. I really enjoyed it. And today I was out at Taylor Hicks, and that was fun, but, you know, they were all somewhere else. They were over to Abaya Judd, so I didn't get to see any of the teachers, but I got to see the principal, the new principal there, and that's one of my adopted schools. And Karen, I'm hoping I was to get there today, but the creek rose or something. I don't know. I lost that ability, but I'm on my way out there.
Anytime.
So
Great.
thank you.
Awesome.
Thanks.
That's true. Yeah. no.
We had science training this morning. That's where they were on our new curriculum, so that's good news.
Just real quickly, I got to attend new teacher orientation at the beginning of last week, and that was really exciting. Man, some of these teachers are just so far ahead of the nervous kid that I was. I mean, these people are just raring to go. You know, they are hyped up and ready to go. So that was really fun.
You probably saw it convocation when I asked the 450 people in the room, 250 of them are teachers, how many of you are brand-new teachers this year? I think we had 6.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
That was amazing.
There is not a district like that in Arizona, I'm convinced. I don't know how we're doing it, but we're doing it. Thanks for your leadership there.
Any other board member reports? Okay. Let's move on. Action items, the consent agenda. Are there questions about the consent agenda tonight?
Yes, sir.
I would note, as Stan usually notes, about donations. We didn't see any donations this time, but we're looking forward to the future.
building
for
up.
that. Yeah. If there are no questions or concerns about the consent agenda, can we get a motion to approve the consent agenda as presented?
So moved.
I'll second that.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded that we approve the consent agenda as presented. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? The motion passes. Our next item is, let me see. I want to be sure, study and voting session. Our first item, Sarah, are there any speakers tonight? Nope, okay. So our first item is to consider adopting the proposed changes in Policy Services Advisory Volume 35, Number 2, number 744 through 746 from July 2023 as presented. This is our second reading, Mr. Tenney.
Yep, we brought this before you a couple of weeks ago, I guess, is all it's been, and so hopefully you can remember that for the test that we're having tonight. These policies are all regarding the adjustment that is being recommended statewide regarding open meeting laws as they apply to curriculum adoption. So going forward, you know, we already started this with the last part of our science curriculum. As soon as we were made aware, hey, this may be coming down the pike, we said, let's make the adjustment now. So in practice, we already did this at our last science curriculum adoption review meeting before it came to the board in public meeting. But the recommendation is that we adopt this policy that clarifies, well, each of these policies, excuse me, clarify that authorized textbook selection committees shall comply with open meeting law requirements. Any questions about that?
I don't know, I'm glad we only got our hands slapped on that violation. So I'm glad to see that this is coming up as a rewrite, and even though it's only taking out one word, board, I want to remind everybody that we are the people who decide everything that's in the curriculum and, or it is taught. We decide all that. That's the board's job. And so I'm very concerned about the digs. I want to make sure that they are all in compliance, that those meetings that people are having with developing the curriculum, making sure it's all aligned and everything, that perhaps that falls under the open meeting law also now. And I'd like council
I believe our attorney already spoke to that in our executive session, remember?
You may recall that we
Yeah.
got to talk about that a couple of weeks ago with the attorney.
Okay, I want to just make sure that, you know, that's supplemental, a lot of it, I think, and teachers can add in whatever they want in the curriculum. I'm just hoping for that to make sure that that is, we get public input on that and everything, so.
So you bring up a really good point, Linda. These policies and the statute from which they are derived are reference specifically textbooks, but supplemental materials is also mentioned as well.
Yeah,
We've also got,
46
we had asked
or
our
whatever.
attorney who spoke to us in our executive session for some additional guidance around supplemental materials, and they
the attorney did get back with us, and I'll share that with you at a time that, well, if Cara, do you have a lot of time tonight? Would you like to hear this tonight? Okay. Cara doesn't want to hear this tonight. She's probably not alone in that respect. But anyhow, long story short, they did make clear to us what the law says, that for K through 8, the board may approve supplemental books and teaching aids.
Yes.
The same thing for 9 through may. It doesn't say in the law that they need to, so it's really up to us how we do that. However, I think it's a good idea, and I'd like to propose, as we talk about this in the future, that we look at where we draw that line. If there's, for instance, I'll give a quick example because I don't want to belabor this too much, but if we're going to read The Hobbit in 9th grade English class, I think it's worth doing what statute says the board may do, which is allow the teacher to start using it and have that come before the board and ratify that. Or not, and say, The Hobbit, don't you realize how subversive that guy is? You know, whatever, he's short, you may have a problem with that. Where do we draw that line? Do we do that every time Mrs. Robertson in 2nd grade wants to read Green Eggs and Ham? Well, certainly not, right? All of us would see that's patently ridiculous. Do we do that every time somebody brings in a current event from USA Today? Certainly not. That's patently ridiculous. But I think there's a line where if there's going to supplementary material, again, like To Kill a Mockingbird or The Hobbit or whatnot, is going to take up a significant portion of the time or be a major supplement to the class, there's room for the argument that the board ought to review that. Does that go through a public meeting process? It certainly does not, according to the law. But there is room for the board to have a vote and ratify that.
Do we have a reading list, an approved reading list that teachers pick from? We had it, that, you know, you pick these books, they get that point across.
Yeah, great question. It's shared with parents in each individual class through the syllabus, et cetera, but we've not gone through the process in the past. You may do this, the district has always chosen in the past. Nope, that's something the principal and the teacher decides together, makes parents aware. If parents want to opt out for any reason, they can do that. That's always been the practice. But we've not brought The Hobbit or To Kill a Mockingbird to the board before. Maybe we should do that going forward. It's worth some discussion on that. But Cara's face tells me probably not tonight.
I think it is another discussion that we're going to need to plan for down the road, and I think we need to involve the district leadership team on that, so that we can come up with a good way to do this.
Okay.
The only thing I was going to mention, you mentioned the digs, that you were concerned about the digs.
Right.
The digs are on our website, you know that, right?
Yes.
And those are when we have classroom teachers who get together as a grade level and decide how we're going to teach the curriculum that's been adopted. What week we'll teach digraphs, what week we'll teach short vowels, what week we'll teach, and it's all, it doesn't come under open meeting law at all.
Correct, yeah. It's not curriculum adoption.
It's not curriculum adoption, it's just
nor
basically
is it
how we
textbook
take that adoption.
However,
and-
Linda, as you mentioned, we do often list supplemental materials
Which
in
are
the digs.
in the digs, right.
And there's a handful of them, under the parameters I've suggested, that we may want to look at. Is that something that we want the board to approve going forward? That's optional in the law for us to do that. We've always opted not to do that, but if our current board says, we want to talk some more in our board meetings about stuff, we can absolutely add that in. I'm not going to go with the Green Eggs and Ham route, but you could convince me that To Kill a Mockingbird is something we should have a short discussion about before we say yay or nay.
Yeah, okay, good. Thank you.
Yes. Any other questions about this policy? Okay. If there are none, then can we get a motion to adopt the proposed changes in Policy Services Advisory Volume 35, Number 2, Number 744 through 746 from July 2023 as presented?
So be it.
So be it. I'll second, so be it.
Okay. It's been moved and seconded that we adopt the proposed changes.
I didn't know we have royalty.
Do I need to say that again, Sarah? The whole thing? Say the whole motion? Okay, it's been moved and seconded. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? And the motion passes. Our next item is taking action to suspend the district's restriction against the presence and consumption of alcohol on district grounds, specifically for the 6 homes located in the teacher village at Taylor Hicks. And that's Mr. Tenney.
And the key portion of that wording that you'll be voting on, either up or down here in a few minutes, is as presented. So here's the presentation piece. This will be in the minutes, and this is what I've shared with you before. Actually, it's a slight adjustment to what I initially shared with you in my board report, because I got some good advice on wording from our district's attorney. So not only has this been vetted broadly, conceptually by the city's attorney and the district's attorney, now our district attorney has chimed in specifically on the wording and has said, this is exactly what you ought to be saying. So as you look at that, do you have questions about what we're proposing be included in the lease? And if you're comfortable with that, then you'll take a vote on suspending the policy in this limited manner. So not on Taylor Hicks campus, 365 days a year everywhere, but just in the teacher village under these circumstances.
I don't know if it's appropriate to put it in here, but what
Sure.
happens if they don't abide by this?
Great question. The lease is very specific about what happens if people don't abide by
that's in
lease
the
agreements.
lease?
Yep, they're not allowed to live there anymore.
Be evicted, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, do they get fired or just evicted?
They would be evicted. It's against state law as well for them to not comply with alcohol policy on campus. And again, you'll be setting parameters around that. If people are using alcohol outside their parameters, it's also a violation of state law.
And tobacco use?
Tobacco use is always banned. We have no choice on that. And possession.
Okay.
And drugs.
And drugs. And firearms, by the way.
Firearms,
Yep.
yeah.
Pets.
If you're active law enforcement,
Yeah.
it's written in state law that you can have weapons
Right.
on campus. These wonderful gentlemen we had tonight are not allowed under any circumstances to have weapons on
Right,
campus.
correct.
That's state law. That's not up to me. It's not up to Nancy. It's not up to any of us as
Right.
board members.
Okay.
Okay, that was my only question.
It's a great question, yeah, yeah. Well, also, it's not here because it doesn't have anything to do with board policy, et cetera. We're limiting the types of pets. We're not going to allow dogs because of barking and pooping outside and things like that. So small pets indoor, 2 or less, that type of thing. There's a number of things in the lease that don't need to come to your attention. It's administrative, but this piece is not strictly administrative. It needs to come to the board.
Okay. Anyone else? Other questions? Okay. Can we get a motion to take action to suspend the district's restriction against the presence and consumption of alcohol on district grounds, specifically for the 6 homes located in the teacher village at Taylor Hicks, as presented?
So moved.
Second?
It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? And that motion passes.
I appreciate that flexibility. There are other teacherages in the state where alcohol is completely banned. I didn't see a specific need for that, and I appreciate that you're unanimously on the same page there. Thank you for that.
Can I ask, it's not on here, but is it going to be written in the lease also that students are not allowed to be invited to these homes after hours or anything, in case we have a party teacher
Sure,
there?
that's already in board policy that,
Okay,
yeah.
all right.
Okay.
Don't want them hanging out there.
They're
even if they
no more allowed
used
to do that than they would at, Jane's house that's not on campus. That's not a thing.
Just had to ask.
Good question.
Okay, our next item is to approve a school facilities oversight board terms and conditions. Mr. Moore.
Finally.
People don't usually say that.
About 30 minutes that I want to speak on this, if that's okay. This is just another utilizing the state's school facility oversight board allocation to our benefit. Most of these are for specifically leaks that happen due to our monsoons that are non-existent. But anyway, and then one is, what was the other one? It's an HVAC unit that went out at Granite Mountain that feeds 4 classrooms, so.
Questions about this item?
And this is Arizona's way of responding to maintenance issues. We wait until they're broken, we can prove it, then we go through a lengthy process, apply for funding.
Yeah, it's got to break
instead of-
before they'll replace it. And with HVACs now, the lead time is terrible, so we need to mitigate the environment that the students are in without an HVAC, cooling. And, but we need your vote to actually even start that process.
Not sure if this, but just FYI, somehow I'm in the loop now on these emails from this group, so I don't know if I'm supposed to be.
You are,
I'm sorry.
you are.
Okay. This is the first I've seen of them. so-
Yeah, they changed their system they changed their portal.
Okay.
And because you're the ultimate signer on the terms and conditions, I have to upload your contact information.
Okay.
And we sell it to third-party,
I
companies.
appreciate that.
So Brian, do we have any kind of time thoughts on this? Like how far in the future this is going to actually happen?
The HVAC,
Yeah, any of them.
the roof repairs are just that.
Okay.
If we need a repair and we spend $2,000 to repair a
can use
roof,
part of this.
then we pay the vendor and then I ask for the money at the state.
Perfect.
The HVAC, we're 2 weeks out. Facilities, we have an incredibly talented HVAC guy on a facilities. He's been able to piece that unit to the point where the classrooms will be doable, but we're 2 weeks out on delivery of that HVAC unit.
We looked initially at what they do at the Phoenix Zoo when it gets hot, hosing the kids down and giving them blood sickles, but then we thought, really, that's going to be
That's
very
if it
unpopular.
goes 3 weeks, we'll be doing that, but 2 weeks, we'll be fine.
All right. Can we get a motion to approve the School Facilities Oversight Board terms and conditions for acceptance of monies from the Building Renewal Grant Fund for PUSD school sites as presented?
I'll make that motion.
Thank you.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed?
Thank
And the
you.
motion passes. Mr. Moore, we have one more. Consider approving the fiscal year 2024 capital plan for the School Facilities Oversight Board. As
I'll make this simple. This is something that every district has to do every year. If we were a growing district and we were to be looking at needing a new facility, this is the document that would show red flags that we need to appeal to the School Facilities Board for a new campus. We're not that.
We're growing, but not at the rate that it would,
We need a new
that it would kick in, that
Yeah.
we need another building right away based on growth alone.
No.
There is no formula for if your average building is 74 years old.
Nope.
If there was, that would kick in.
Well, and actually the formula for fixing those 74-year was the item
That's
before.
exactly right.
But no, this is just, it's a mandatory thing that we do every year, and it does nothing except for show that we did it, and you voted on it, and the end result is, based on the School Facilities Board's square footage, we have ample room in our 74 averaged building.
So it just keeps us eligible if we need it.
If we didn't do this, we would have no access to the School Facility Board money whatsoever.
Okay.
So you don't do this, we don't have an agenda item to fix HVACs and things
Okay.
like that.
There's
so.
significant consequences for not following state procedures. and
Absolutely.
policies.
Yeah, there's like 15 things I need to do just to be eligible for those monies, and this is one of them.
Okay. Any other comments or questions? Can we get a motion to approve the fiscal year 2024 capital plan for the School Facilities Oversight Board as presented?
I will make that motion.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? And the motion passes. All right, information and discussion items. Brian, school summary budget report.
As presented, unless there's questions.
Okay. We do have another proposed change in policy services, advisory volume 35, number 2, number 747, and this will deal with medicines and seizure procedures. Do we have anybody speaking to that, Mr. Tenney?
Yeah.
Okay.
So you've got the policy in front of you, but if you're like me, you have to do a lot of reading through it and carefully comparing it to previous policy before you really understand what's going on here. So I'll try to share the short version. You can see all the lined out pieces. That's essentially making this more terse and readable and less redundant. And then in addition to that, there is a significant addition that's in response to a state law that was passed in the previous legislative session, not this one that just ended yesterday, I guess.
Yeah.
But the previous one, saying that if there is any student who is diagnosed with seizures, that family is encouraged to come up with a seizure management plan and share that with the school. The school then has to make sure that they visit with the parent, accept that plan, make sure the school nurse is aware of that, and then in addition to that, non-nurse staff listed in ARS 15160, and you may or may not have looked up that statute. I did. Principal, counselors, teachers, bus drivers, and others whose duties include regular contact with students who have submitted a seizure management plan. So, does every bus driver need to do this? Nope. Does every teacher need to do this? No. But any teacher who is, so if we have somebody at the high school and they have 6 teachers, every one of the teachers is going to need to get training in how to deal with someone who might have a seizure. It has to be state-approved training. There's one avenue for that right now. It's online. It's 75 minutes and it's free. So we've actually already directed our folks to start on this, knowing that this law would be effective going soon. If you decide for some reason, no, we don't want to do that, it won't be in policy, but we will still comply with state law. But I would recommend that we put this in policy to remind us all what we need to do going forward. Do you have questions? Yes, ma'am.
I saw that we're supposed to be keeping epinephrine pens,
Yeah.
2 on each campus. Do those expire, or this
Yes.
is going to be a total big expense for us?
Yes,
Yes,
and yes.
and yes.
All 3 of those
That's-
things are accurate. Yeah,
that's
we've been doing
beyond
that for several
usually.
years. There is a big expense. We can get rebates for that from the state and coupons, et cetera, but it's still, it's a significant expense each year because they do expire after, I think, just a year, if I'm not mistaken. So, yeah. we
Yeah, I
do-
think so, the
Okay.
frequency that we order them.
And keeping
from.
the Narcan or whatever that is on campus, is that a new thing or a?
That's a relatively new thing because Narcan is a relatively new thing, but this is not the first year that we would do that. It's the first year that I think it's specific, may or may not, I'm not sure, Carl, if that was specifically in policy before, but at any rate, it will be going forward if you approve this. But it's not something brand new. We've been doing that at the secondary level for the last few years, and the state and county health department provides that to us for free.
Okay.
But not so with EpiPens. They help us acquire them at a discount, but there's a significant expense involved with that. They do expire, and we've been doing it for years, and we'll be going forward too.
Okay, thank you.
Great questions.
Just curious, students that are identified as seizure, students that may have seizures, do we require them to ride a special bus to get to school? I mean,
Yeah.
they just ride their regular bus
If-
and their bus driver?
It's a good question. If someone had seizures frequent and significant enough that their healthcare provider recommended that we need to do something like that, we would develop a 504 plan for them and give them
Okay.
any kind of accommodations they need. But just
Okay.
in general, if say Stan had a daughter and he came to us and said, hey, there's a possibility of seizures, we would respond to what the family's needs are, including a 504 plan if needed and those things, but we would not say, oh, seizures, they have to ride this bus.
Yeah, okay, all right. Thank you. So that's first reading, and we'll
Right.
vote on that at the next meeting.
Yeah, but to be clear, we're implementing this now. If the board chooses not to put it in policy, we'll still follow state law. We always do our very best to follow state law, except for when it turns out every school district in the entire state for the last 30 years has not been following state law, and we're made aware of it, then we start to follow that state law.
And because we have licensed nurses at every school, they are on top of this stuff. They check their meds, they train
That's well said.
teachers, and those nurses do an amazing job.
That's a significant, Marty's exactly right, a significant advantage that many rural school districts do not have. We appreciate the board recognizing that's important. Number 1, keep kids safe. Number 2, make sure they're successful.
Okay. Next item is community comments. Does any board member have anything to share with regards to community comments?
Can you think of anybody you need to put your arm around their shoulder and share what you learned tonight?
About every day.
Can I'm sorry, I know I'm not a board member, but I have heard over and over again from our staff what a wonderful convocation that was. Sometimes staff are a little reluctant because they want to be in their classroom, but I heard comments about Andy and kind of making your little joke at the beginning and then getting emotional. They really appreciated. They appreciated the length of it, the good feeling, the foundation shirts. It had a great feeling yesterday, and you're a big part of that. So thank you very much.
I was going to wear my shirt today. I wore it all day and then spilled coffee on it.
The retreat, where's the retreat?
It looks like it'll wash up good.
You should know, I won't belabor this, but you should know, in as far as convocation went well, so many people played a significant role, each of you for sure, but the two people who made it most happen are sitting immediately to my right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
We're just
Thank you very much.
facilitators.
No, immediately.
Oh,
to my
media,
right.
I missed that, sorry.
A ton of work went into
I
that.
thought you said 4 people down.
And I get emotional all the time, so no, there's nothing special
It's
about
good.
that.
It's good.
There's nothing wrong with caring, ma'am.
Nope.
I love it.
No.
All right, our next meeting dates, we have a regular study and voting session on September 12th at 5 PM here. Just as a heads up, we will have an executive session following that meeting
After.
So
After.
examinations at 5?
about a special topic that we'll be obtaining legal counsel on. We'll have our governing board retreat to go over performance pay and evaluations and Clark's transition and all sorts of things on Friday, September 29th, 8 AM. First day of school is tomorrow. No,
No,
Thursday.
Thursday.
I'm thinking of my
You are
wife.
like.
It just
getting
seems like we've been doing this for 24
My
hours.
wife's first day of school is tomorrow,
Okay.
so she starts with kids tomorrow, so I'm sorry, but again,
She won't be sleeping well tonight.
Yeah.
It's like Christmas night.
It is.
and then I know a couple of us have signed up for Tim Carter's training at the YCESA on August 28th, so looking forward to that, and a few of us have signed up for the ASBA Law Conference.
And there's one more thing on September 6th, the schoolyard habitat ribbon cutting ceremony at Taylor Hicks. So we got invites to that.
And since, I'm gonna go, since we don't have to be at the pre-conference thing, so.
I was planning on going
looking
too.
forward to go to that.
And Marcia Hicks is going to represent the family too.
Nice.
Oh.
Yeah, same, I'll be there and then head directly from there down to the ASBA
Okay.
Law Conference. So
All right.
probably some of us who are heading down there will be on the same
Yeah.
schedule that way.
Okay. And if there's nothing further, then we're adjourned.
All right. Thanks.